Hey guys, welcome to a new video. Like, comment and subscribe if you enjoy. Without any further interruptions, enjoy the What If. Chapter 1. The Zombie and the Strawberry. Kurosaki. Ichigo could recognize that rather annoying voice from anywhere. As he turned around, Ichigo spotted a fully healed Ishida Ryu forming his spirit weapon Ginrei Kojaku, and instantly thought he was screwed. While Ichigo didn't know the exact identity of the person who attacked Ryu earlier, he suspected it to be Tsukishima Shukuro. It was only logical, since every one of his friends and family except Ryu were currently under the influence of Tsukishima's Fullbring. Ichigo knew that Inoue Orihime was also under Tsukishima's influence, so it was either that Ryu was healed before Orihime fell under Tsukishima's Fullbring, or Ryu was on the same boat with them. There was also the fact that Ichigo didn't have all the pieces to put the situation together, which meant that he needed to keep his guard up around everyone. Right now the only person he could place his trust on was Ginjo Kugo, who seemed to be immune to Tsukishima's Fullbring. So Ishida, you were on his side too. Well, fuck, this just gets better and better, I guess. Ichigo said with a scowl, while eyeing Ryu warily. The overwhelming feeling of dread was catching up to him. Just what did he do to deserve this shit? Where were Urahara-san, Yoruichi-san, and his goddamn father when he needed them the most? Kurosaki, just shut up and come here. I already checked downstairs. I'm on your side, so stop with all your worrying, and hurry up. Ryu yelled to Ichigo in a no-nonsense tone, but Ichigo was still skeptical of the situation. As if I'll fall for that, scoffed Ichigo. Kurosaki, you idiot. Don't you understand? The one who cut me is the guy right behind you. Ryu tried to reason with Ichigo once more, only to realize that he was already late. He quickly gathered the reishi around him, and started to fire arrows at Ginjo, who had a predatory smirk on his face, standing right behind Ichigo. Ichigo's eyes widened in shock, but it was already too late for him to react in time. Ginjo swatted the arrows away with one swift slash like some pests that were bothering him, and brought his broadsword down. It easily cut through Ichigo, and left a deep gash from his left shoulder to his lower abdomen. Ichigo, who had barely taken in Yuryu's words, responded a little too late, resulting in a wound which wasn't fatal, but more than enough to make him fall down to his knees. Kurosaki, yelled Ryu. Ichigo couldn't believe it. Did Ginjo just betray him? No, that wasn't right. Ichigo knew that Ginjo never was on his side to begin with. Ichigo cursed himself for his stupid naivety, for trusting Ginjo, who he barely knew anything about. He never should have trusted someone who came out of the blue one day, and told him that they intended to restore his long-lost Shinigami powers. He was a fucking idiot who didn't know how to think first before he leapt. Of course, everything was a plot that somehow involved him. What did he really expect from Ginjo? A man who tried to manipulate him with the information about his family. It was clear as day that he had some kind of hidden agenda from the beginning. He should have kept on being suspicious about the whole situation, even after hearing the reason execution sought him out. Ichigo saw Ryu getting cut down from the behind by Tsukishima out of the corner of his eyes. Now that Ryu also received an injury from Tsukishima, was he going to turn his back on him too? How could an ability like that exist? This was almost as ridiculous as Kyoka Suigetsu's complete hypnosis. Maybe not on the same level, but still. Ha 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 ha. Ginjo erupted in full-blown laughter, as he watched Ryu slump down to the ground unconscious. He had done it. A plot that he masterminded was executed flawlessly. And now, it was time to claim the prize. Why, Ginjo, I thought you... Ichigo barely squeezed out the words. It wasn't the matter of his physical injuries. Anyone who happened to lay their eyes on him could see that his will was completely broken at the moment. The steel-like resolve that pushed him to invade the Soul Society without a second thought to save Kuchiki Rukia. The stubbornness that refused to leave Orihime in Hawako Mundo at the mercy of the enemy. The determination to willingly make a sacrifice that would change his life, if only to defeat a threat to his friends, once and for all. At that time it really didn't matter to him, whether it meant that he would be left in the position to need to be protected or not, because he could never sit aside and watch everything he cherished burnt down. When he was powerless, it was the same problem that made him seek power once more. He probably would have kept away from the whole situation, if not for the assault on his friends, the culprits now revealed to be Tsukishima and Ginjo. But now, he had fallen for their whole ploy, and there was no way out. Tsukishima's Fullbring worked perfectly as intended, Kurosaki, Ginjo stated in a matter-of-fact tone, looking down at Ichigo. Oh, just so you know, I didn't become your enemy because Tsukishima cut me. Ginjo quickly added before Ichigo could retort. The fact that he was played like a naive idiot all along from the start made Ichigo want to kill himself for his stupidity. He should have kept staying on guard. He didn't trust Ginjo when he first approached him, and he still didn't trust him even when they began his training. Just when did that change? Why? If you seriously believed that only I was immune to Tsukishima's Fullbring or something like that, you really are a masterpiece, Kurosaki. If you could beat Aizen and be praised as the hero of the Winter War, then maybe destroying all those Shinigami just might be easier than I first thought. Tsukishima cut me twice, Ichigo, and the second cut returned me to my original self again. Do you get it now? Everything was a part of the plan I made. While Ginjo was busy ridiculing him, Ichigo noticed the difference in his demeanor. Ginjo became more arrogant, sinister, and cruel compared to the Ginjo he started to trust before he got cut by Tsukishima. Apparently, it wasn't for the first time. So this was the kind of man Ginjo truly was behind all the acts. His real self was closer to the man he acted like when he trained Ichigo in his Fullbring. I'll tell you something, Kurosaki. Now I'm gonna steal your powers, and leave you powerless once more. I wonder how you'll feel when all your powers get sucked out from you. I can imagine that it wouldn't be pleasant. Ginjo looked down at him, as if he was pitying Ichigo. Ginjo placed his substitute Shinigami badge on the guard of his sword. Ichigo watched silently as the badge was fused into the sword, turning into a skull-like form. Soon Ichigo was interrupted by another spike of pain, this time from the center of his chest. Ichigo stared blankly at Ginjo's sword of scaffold, which had pierced through his chest. He wanted to laugh so badly, but couldn't find the strength to do so. Although Ichigo knew that his intelligence was nowhere near the level of the kinds like Urahara Kazuki, Aizen Sosuke, and Kuritsuchi Mayuri, he honestly could say he was never this stupid. Of course, he had a penchant to jump in situations without thinking. Maybe it was a major understatement if he put it like that, but getting played like this like a puppet in a child's doll play. He couldn't believe that his desperation for power actually blinded his eyes this much, enough to make him believe the words of some jackass, whose words were never straightforward from the start. Oh, how the mighty has fallen, Ichigo thought to himself, noticing his powers shifting uncomfortably, as if it knew what would happen to it soon. But then again, was I ever worthy to be referred as mighty in the first place? Ichigo won against Zaraki Kenpachi only because the brute enjoyed fighting too much, that their fight dragged on longer than it should have been. Zaraki could have cut him down in the first 5 minutes, if he thought about it now. Hell, it couldn't be considered a win, since he lost consciousness right after Zaraki, right in the middle of the enemy territory. It was technically a draw, but Ichigo had strutted around spewing that he defeated a captain, when the truth was that Zaraki never was serious in fighting him. The fight against Kuchiki Byakuya ended up as his victory only because his inner hollow took over, and bought him the needed time to win. He was still losing while using his Bankai, not even noticing the fact that he was tiring out, which Byakuya easily took notice of. It took him 3 life-threatening fights to overcome Grimmjow Jaegerjackez, and he could have gotten himself killed anytime during their first fight. He only survived because of his sheer luck, and the fact that Grimmjow was toying with him. It could have been one of Aizen's games, too. If he were to be honest, his inner hollow had defeated Ulquiorra Schiffer, not himself. He actually died at that time if his memories served him correctly. He was being thrashed badly the whole time, regardless of Ulquiorra's state, be it his sealed form, or his resurrection form. He sacrificed his powers to defeat Aizen Sosuke, but it wasn't enough at the end. Urahara Kazuki's brilliance was the only reason that led to the successful sealing and imprisonment of Aizen right now. Ichigo realized that he should have died a long time ago for being such an idiot. It seemed that he was paying the price for his stupidity now. But it was too late to change anything that had already happened. During the 17 months of his isolation from the Soul Society, he easily noticed that the residents of Urahara Shoten were distancing themselves from him. To think of it, His father didn't even bother to show his ass when Tsukishima was meddling with his own daughter's memories, and Ichigo knew that Isshin had recovered most of his strength. Now that he thought about it, even the Vizards never bothered to make any contact with him. Honestly, it stung. Maybe he was being overly dramatic with all the emotional stuff that was crashing down on him, but could anyone really fault him for it? We were allies from the very start, Kurosaki. When Tsukishima cut me for the first time, we became enemies, supposedly betrayed by each other. And it was all part of our plan, just for this very moment. Your friend with the glasses. He was attacked by me, and only because it would have been too boring if there was no one on your side. I mean, a fight we can't lose. Come on, where is the fun in that? Your fate depended on you noticing the difference between him and your other friends, which you obviously failed. Ginjo was having his time of his life while monologuing to Ichigo, not that Ichigo could do anything about it. My Fullbring, the Book of the End, its first strike allows me to carve my existence into the victim's past memories in any way I choose to. A friend, mentor, family, lover. Everything is possible, and the second strike can remove that effect. Quite the ability, wouldn't you agree? Tsukishima joined Ginjo and properly explained his Fullbring. So, the only way I can remove its influence from my friends and family is to make him cut them once more. Or maybe if I kill him. Ichigo thought his situation was so fucked up, which was practically his fault for falling into this trap. Or was it really? He made the choice to seek execution for power, because his friends were being harmed by someone. He hated being powerless, because he was forced to sit back and watch as his friends dealt with the matters of the afterlife. Even then, he could have somehow dealt with it, if his friends didn't get themselves hurt. Urahara-san always seemed to know what was happening around Karakura town. Is this event any different from the others? Did Urahara-san and Yoruichi-san know what was going on, observing from the sidelines like they always did? But then why didn't they interfere yet? There has to be some kind of big plan in this situation, right? Am I being suspicious for no reason, trying to find an excuse that could lift this unbearable guilt? They will come up with some fancy plan to solve this mess, right? No, this wasn't like him. Just what was he doing, trying to shift the blame to other people? Ichigo clenched his gut in disgust and spat out a lone curse. Shit. Shit, indeed. Since I would be in close contact with you for quite some time, in order to prevent you from suspecting me, we used Tsukishima's Fullbring to make me consider him as an enemy. Not that it was a crucial part of our plan. Ginjo said while he fiddled with the skull on his sword. Hey, that's not true. Your acting skills were just too horrible, so that we just had to do it. It wasn't an option, Tsukishima retorted in a joking manner. Oh, shut up. My acting mere minutes ago was on par with the very best of the Hollywood actors. Yeah, right. As soon as I cut you, you started to call him Kurosaki again. And you didn't even notice it till I told you just now. Well, fuck you too. They sure look like they're enjoying themselves. I guess they can't really help it, when they made this day probably my second to worst day in my life. Ichigo mused somewhat calmly. He knew what was coming, and there really was nothing he could do that would change the outcome. He didn't even bother to try and strike a conversation with them, seeing it as pointless. And then he felt it. It felt like a part of the dam withholding his powers had broke down. In a mere few seconds, every last drop of his new power was lost, sucked out from him. His Fullbring was now completely absorbed to Ginjo, and he was powerless once more. Ichigo dropped his substitute Shinigami badge, the source of his Fullbring, which was now probably just an ordinary piece of wood. It felt like he had used another Mugetsu, except that there was no loss of Zangetsu this time, since he wasn't even with him at the moment. Oh, how he missed Zangetsu. Ichigo suddenly felt tears running down his cheeks. Or was it the rain? When did it start to rain anyway? Ah, this feels great. I couldn't thank you enough, Kurosaki Ichigo. I can have my revenge at last, and it's all thanks to you. Kurosaki. Uryu glanced at Ichigo with sympathy. He knew fully well of how losing his powers would be for Ichigo, as he himself had lost his Quincy powers once when he used Quincy, let's still. And now, Ichigo had to go through it again. Uryu noticed the tears running down Ichigo's cheeks, and shut his eyes closed. Uryu did not want to watch his ally. No, friend. Yes, his friend's weakest moment. And it seemed that Tsukishima and Ginjo noticed it too, obviously not sharing his sentiment. Oh, is he crying? Now I feel so horrible. He is just a kid after all. Tsukishima mocked Ichigo with fake concern. Well, let him cry it all out. It's not like we have any use for him anymore. The chances of us crossing paths with him again is almost non-existent. Maybe I should tell him about how he was deceived by the Shinigami too. It would be good for him to at least learn all of the truth, since I was the predecessor of his role. Ginjo rubbed his chin with his fingers, causing Tsukishima to sigh in response. Whatever, the faster you do it the earlier we take our leave. Your call, Tsukishima muttered, and let out another sigh of annoyance. Well, I suppose I could tell you. Kurosaki, do you know the purpose of the badge? The one that the Shinigami gave you? Well, you probably wouldn't, since you're all so trusting that you'd never suspect any of your so-called friends, right? It's a device used to track a substitute Shinigami, and control our Reiatsu if they need to do so. They never trusted you, Kurosaki. And the most juicy part of the story you see, is the identity of the person who came up with this device. Do you want to know his name, Kurosaki? Ginjo's face lit up with a malicious grin. Ichigo instinctively knew that he probably wouldn't like what he was about to hear. His name is Yukitake Jashiro, captain of the 13th Division, the most peace-loving, seemingly harmless captain of the Soul Society. And he was actually the one who came up with this idea. Do you see now, Kurosaki Ichigo? The Shinigami don't deserve to be trusted. Even the most peaceful captain can be crafty when he needs to be. If that is the case, just what could the other Shinigami be hiding behind their back? Ginjo let out a snarl, full of hatred. Ginjo seemed to be dead serious in his words, that it wasn't even funny. Ichigo pieced the facts together, and understood the reason why Captain Yukitake had to give this to him. If the substitute Shinigami before him was this asshole, safety measures were needed to be taken, and he could respect that decision. To be honest, he was expecting the badge to be something like that almost right from the beginning. Kurosaki, don't listen to him. Uryu desperately cried out, not wanting his friend to vent his anger of the moment at the Shinigami. It was Ichigo who made him change his mind that the Shinigami and Quincy just might be able to work together, and he didn't want Ichigo's relation with them hindered by this piece of information. The Ichigo he knew would jump to conclusions right there without a second thought. But to his surprise Ichigo laughed bitterly, albeit being almost inaudible. Kurosaki. I expected it from the start, Ginjo. It's not like I trusted the Shinigami as a whole anyway. I trust only my friends in the Soul Society, nothing less, nothing more. Ichigo replied, but he couldn't hide the bitterness as well as he would have liked to. Uryu noticed it and frowned, but acknowledged the fact that Ichigo had the right to feel some resentment. Well, you're taking this better than I expected. But it doesn't matter, I'm gonna get my revenge, and you can't stop me, Ginjo said, while the smug smirk didn't leave his face, not even for a second. After all, what can you do, without any kind of powers? Ichigo inwardly sighed and clenched his fist. He had lost, so it was no use in trying to oppose Ginjo at the moment. But there was something he had to do. He had to do this, no matter how it sucked. His pride and ego weren't worth his friendship, and his family. This whole situation was something he dragged them into, so it was only right that he should be the one to fix it. Tsukishima-san. Ichigo choked out the honorific. To show respect to the bastard who had tortured him mentally, by messing with the memories of people close to him. It was way harder than he had first thought. He could almost hear his inner hollow's furious voice. You sure stooped low, Kingy. Let me out and I'll just kill 'em all, and be done with it. No king of mine begs to a goddamn, backstabbing weakling. You don't even deserve to be called a king, much less a horse. But then again, he wasn't even here anymore. Ichigo couldn't believe himself, but he actually missed his inner hollow, and it wasn't just because of the power that came with him. He even missed the smug look on his white counterpart's face. Tsukishima tilted his head with a rather confused expression. The Ichigo he knew would have already started to curse him, and demanded to give his powers back. What was with the sudden change in his attitude? Ichigo clenched his fist. He had to do this. This time he heard Zangetsu, repeating the words he had spoke in the past. Abandon your fear. Look forward. Move forward and never stop. You'll age if you pull back. You'll die if you hesitate. Sorry, Zangetsu. I fear for being left alone. I shouldn't have looked back, and now I have neither the will nor strength to move forward. I pulled back again, and I'm already dead inside. Ichigo was unsure of what Zangetsu would think of him, when he saw what he had become. He really didn't want to see Zangetsu's disappointed expression directed at him, but he still wanted to see him nonetheless. Please, cancel your Fullbring that you used on my friends and sisters. Ichigo felt self-loathing, at how pitiful he sounded. He vowed to never let something like this happen again, no matter what. He'll be damned if he acted before thinking once more. From now on, he was going to think at least twice before he leapt. Yuryu's head snapped up in shock. Was this really the Kurosaki Ichigo he knew? He knew that Ichigo always did try his best to protect the people he deemed precious to himself, but to completely discard his pride, and beg to the very people who caused this whole situation, and stole his powers. The sudden change in his behavior was disconcerting, to say at the least. Uryu blamed himself for not being strong enough to stop this from happening. He had never wanted to see Ichigo in such state, regardless of his opinion about the former substitute Shinigami. Kurosaki Ichigo should never bow to anyone in this humiliating manner. He was a person who would never back down, no matter what he was facing, and it was supposed to stay that way. If only he was stronger, Ichigo's pride wouldn't have had to be ripped to shreds. Oh my, that was quite unexpected. What should I do? What should I do? Tsukishima seemed to be enjoying his current standing, on the receiving end of the famed hero of the Winter War's plea. Having Kurosaki Ichigo at his complete mercy. The sensation was exhilarating to him. Time slowly passed, and after an hour-like minute of silence, Tsukishima turned back and started to walk away again without another word. When Ichigo tried to say something, he barely heard Tsukishima's reply through the downpour. Nope. Ichigo bit his lower lip, and let out an incoherent scream of fury. He was clenching his fist so hard that blood started to seep out from his palm, where his nails had dug in. All the anger he had bottled up inside of him finally exploded outwards. If he still had his powers, he would have hollow-feed completely, just because of the boiling rage he was feeling at the moment. Tsukishima, goddamn you, I'll make you pay, you motherfucker. No matter how long it takes, I'll kill you. I'm gonna completely destroy everything remotely involved with you. I'll make sure to make you beg for your death before I kill you, I swear it. Ichigo screamed in burning fury, in righteous rage, and promised to himself that Tsukishima Shukuro and Ginjo Kugo were going to regret ever approaching him. It was a vow that he would keep, even if he had to make a deal with the devil. Sadly, the people on the receiving end of his rage didn't even bother to acknowledge his outburst. By the way, your Quincy friend is going to feel the effects of my Fullbring soon. You have nothing left to you, Kurosaki. Your friends. Your family. I'll make sure to have them ignore and hate you. You don't have the power to stop me, Kurosaki. You have absolutely nothing now, nothing. Do you want to know something really hilarious? There were some Shinigami watching us the whole time. They abandoned you. How do you feel, Kurosaki, now that you've learned that there's no one on your side? Ichigo's face paled at the revelation. Tsukishima had to be lying to him. His friends in the Soul Society would never abandon him like this. But deep inside, he knew that Tsukishima wasn't lying. Oh, well, I think we've overstayed our welcome, so we should really get going. Goodbye. Tsukishima soon disappeared through the rain, Ginjo's form following without another word. Tsukishima's words struck him hard. Did he really have nothing left to him? The Shinigami were here, and they didn't even bother to interfere. And to think he sacrificed his powers to clean up their mess. Only for him to get involved in another mess of the Shinigami once more, to be the one left to suffer the consequences. Ginjo obviously had some bad blood between him and the Shinigami, and now he was caught between them as the victim, or some kind of bait. Oh, maybe he really was a bait, if they really were watching him all this time. Erg. Ichigo shut his eyes, not wanting to see anything he wouldn't like. Ichigo hated the sound of rain pouring around him. He didn't want to hear anything. Ichigo, I hate the rain. It rains in this world too. When you're upset, the skies grow cloudy, and when you're sad, it rains. I can't stand it. I wonder if you can grasp the terror of being rained on in this lonely world. Yes, I understand now, Zangetsu. To be able to hold back the rain, I'll give you everything I have. Should you place your trust in me, I won't let any rain fall on this world. I promise. You did give everything you have, Zangetsu. But maybe I didn't trust you enough. It's probably flooding in there now, huh? I'm sorry, Zangetsu. I don't want to see what you would think of what I had become. But at the same time I miss you terribly, and hope to see you again. It was always raining when something bad happened to him. That was when Kurosaki Ichigo realized that he hated the rain too, just like Zangetsu, if not more. Zangetsu was a part of his soul, so it was only natural that they both hated the rain. A part of Ichigo died that day. A black-haired girl with light blue eyes hastily made her way through the halls of the frozen palace. She was wearing some sort of white-colored military uniform, which was designed to match her taste. She followed the footsteps of a blonde-haired man, who held a stoic expression that made it hard for people to approach him. But in reality, he's just a big softy inside. The girl thought to herself, barely suppressing a giggle from escaping. Almost everyone in Silburn knew that Jugram Hashwalt cared deeply about his fellow Quincy, although he would just blankly stare back at them if someone dared to say that in his face. While she knew that Jugram wasn't a big fan of friendly chats, her mouth was twitching for some conversation. So, have any ideas about why His Majesty would want to see me? The girl asked while eyeing her blonde comrade's face, trying to read what he was thinking through his expression. Unsurprisingly, his expression never changed in the slightest, which made her pout in disappointment. No, His Majesty merely asked me to inform you of your summon, nothing more than that, Jugram said while maintaining his demeanor. If he was being honest, the girl was relatively pleasant to strike a conversation compared to the other Sternritter. The point being relatively, as she still was irritating. And please, stop staring at me. Fine. Oh, I know. Maybe I'll be assigned a special mission that concerns the future of the Empire. I hope it's gonna be fun. Maybe it'll be a chance to add something new to my collection. The girl giggled. Jugram actually had a hard time trying not to roll his eyes. If His Majesty really did give a mission to the girl, who certainly wasn't the most sane person in Silburn, he shuddered at the thought. He tried not to think about how messed up the outcome would be, knowing that it would be a guaranteed failure. But on second thought, Giselle Gewel would never fail something if it was a direct order from His Majesty. The two Quincy's rather one-sided conversation came to an end, when they reached a large door, which led to the throne room of Silburn. Jugram almost sighed aloud in relief, for he would be free at last from the annoying Sternritter. The door slowly slid open, and Jugram actually rolled his eyes at the Emperor's dramatics. Where were the usual soldats, who should be on guard duty anyway? Were they slacking off? He tuned out the girl's rambling, since it was starting to bother him too much. Since we are here, I shall take my leave. His Majesty asked for your presence alone. Jugram said, a little saddened by the fact that he was being left out of the details. It was the very first mission to be assigned since His Majesty woke up from his near 1,000-year-long slumber, and as the Sternritter Grand Master, he really wasn't used to being left out like this. But who was he to question His Majesty's decisions? While it was true that His Majesty didn't want his subordinates to follow his orders blindly, Jugram wasn't about to doubt His Majesty just because he felt left out of anything. All right, see ya Jugo. As Jugram was about to retort about her blatant use of his pet name, at this point he cursed Bazb, since it was him who spread it among the other Sternritter for the sole purpose of pissing him off. He noticed that the girl had already took her leave, and let out his long overdue sigh. She really did know how to get on his nerves. Jugram didn't notice the way the end of his lips curved upwards, as he unknowingly made a small grin. When Giselle entered the throne room, her almost trademark-like dopey smile faltered for a second. She noticed that there was something off about the Emperor. The Emperor seemed no different from his usual resting pose on the lone throne, except for the fact that he was actually smiling. Seriously, she didn't even know that he could make that kind of expression, but it was a good surprise. If His Majesty was in a good mood, then so was she. Her dopey smile returned as she knelt down on one knee respectfully, showing her respect for the monarch, the father of the Quincy, once Quincy king and now the emperor of the Wandenreich, Yhwach. He was probably the only person she respected, and she would be damned if she showed any less respect than the emperor deserved. I have come to answer your summon, your majesty. She spoke in a manner no Sternritter other than Jugram knew that she was capable of, including her friends. She always made sure to draw a line between her public appearance and formal behavior, which was reserved only for the emperor. Ah, yes, my Sternritter. Let's skip the pleasantries and the usual verbal whippings, as I have summoned you with a matter of great importance. Also, I do know that your little hobby won't hinder our strength due to your shrift, unlike your sister. The emperor said with a hint of amusement, which Giselle caught on quickly. Yes, I guess Bambietta can be quite volatile. But the only reason she is allowed to continue her rather disrespectful actions, is the fact that her strength will more than make up for it when the time comes, is it not? Said Giselle. She knew that the emperor enjoyed some cheekiness from his children, as long as it wasn't in a completely disrespectful manner. Yhwach chuckled at the girl's response, knowing that it was the truth. But at the same time, he knew that if he didn't correct her thoughts properly, their behavior would likely continue as it is. If it comes to that, he would have to resort to unnecessary means to correct their behavior. He most certainly did not want to resort to unnecessary means. Yes, although I hope she would stop killing off the soldats whenever she is in a nasty mood. While I do admit the fact that the Sternritter's strength and usefulness are not remotely comparable to the soldats, they still are my children all the same. I would rather not have them killed by my own children's hands because of their distasteful habits, if possible. If her behavior actually was as lewd as she feigned to be, her status as a Sternritter would have been revoked a long time ago. But enough of that. Before I have gotten sidetracked, I was going to inform you that you will be assigned to an urgent mission which involves the human world. Giselle almost gasped in surprise upon hearing that. As far as she knew, no one was assigned a mission to the human world since His Majesty had awoke from his slumber. The last one was something about convincing the Ishida family to return to Silburn and prepare for the war, which was ordered by Jugram and resulted in a failure. She also kept the unspoken warning in her mind. Even though her shrift was a different case compared to her friend, since it did not result in a permanent loss to the Empire, His Majesty was not pleased about their acts of killing their own kind, just because their status was above them. His Majesty always did disapprove conflicts in his empire, after all. She also noted to herself to pass on the warning to her friend Bambietta. It was quite obvious that it was what His Majesty wanted her to do, if the way he mentioned the said person was any indication of it. I am yours to command, Your Majesty, the girl said, while lowered her head and awaited her emperor's words. It was a rather rare moment for her to be so serious, which Yhwach noticed and nodded in satisfaction. He knew for a fact that while not every one of his subordinates held him in high regard, most of the Sternritters did, and he tried his best to gain it from the ones who didn't. Every last one of the Quincy were his children, and he wished to be respected by his sons and daughters as any self-respecting father would. Yhwach knew that the Yhwach from a millennia ago would scoff at such thoughts, but he was somewhat of a changed man. Yamamoto would have never imagined even in his dreams that he would get this soft. But then again, Yamamoto wasn't the best person to express an opinion about such matters. Yamamoto himself had gotten much more softer, even to his enemies, which was disappointing and pathetic to say at the least. The way he refrained from using his bankai when Aizen betrayed the Soul Society. The Yamamoto he knew wouldn't have cared about the backlash, and used his bankai to reduce the traitors to ash. Yhwach on the other hand, he was more than willing to do the very worst to his enemy. The victor of the past war would learn soon enough that he had lost the right to be called a victor, at the cost of his own life. The mission you will be given concerns the most important and unexpected part of our war preparations. You will be sent out to recruit one of the special war powers. Are you up for the task, Sternritter? Yhwach asked, already knowing her answer. Yes, Your Majesty. Rest assured, for I shall not fail you in any way. Giselle replied with the exact answer the Emperor wanted to hear, and it satisfied him to no end. Good. The identity of the one you are to recruit is the #1 special war power, Kurosaki Ichigo. I shall cover the background roughly in case you haven't read the daten about him. Also, if you have not read it yet, make sure that you do so before heading out. His mother was an Quincy who was infected by an experimental hollow of Aizen Sosuke, another one of the special war powers. Due to this incident she was degraded to a gemist, and was subjected to the Oswalin at the time of my awakening. Sadly, at that moment she and her eldest child were being targeted by a hollow. Yhwach spoke in a soft voice, full of sorrow for the loss of his daughter. It didn't help that he had a hand in the whole incident. Immediately after being stripped of her powers, she was consumed by the hollow while protecting her son, Kurosaki Ichigo. Because of this incident, attempting to recruit him was never a part of my plan. Initially I had thought that he wouldn't react well to the fact that I unknowingly had a hand in his mother's death, regardless of my intentions. Even if he joined us, I had thought that it would have been most likely an attempt to oppose us from within. His rather rash personality would make it hard for him to see reason, and his friendship with the Shinigami wouldn't have helped. I had dismissed the idea, but there was a change to the situation in the recent events. At this point the Sternritter was curious about where this story was leading to. It was getting quite interesting after all. It all started from the reports from the Soul Society's R&D department. The very information that would not only allow my son to see the light, but more than enough to make him despise the Shinigami, possibly more so than any of the Sternritter, was acquired. Then, the events that occurred to him a few days ago presented us the perfect opportunity to approach him. Yes, my son born in the darkness shall finally see the light. Yhwach chuckled. He was ecstatic about the fact that the scales of the upcoming war had tipped greatly to their favor, but that wasn't all. The son he thought he would have to face, and inevitably put down with his own hands on the battlefield would soon see the truth. He didn't have to paint his hands with his own son's blood, and that alone was enough to improve his mood. Giselle's eyes sparkled with interest. The fact that she was assigned a mission of such importance made her giddy, but that wasn't all. A Quincy who had been oblivious of his heritage for all his life. Now that was interesting, and if her memories served her correctly the guy was a sight for sore eyes back then, when he was fighting Aizen. She might have thought of him to be intimidating, if only she wasn't familiar with the other Sternritter. Compared to them, the guy was a cutie. You are to leave tomorrow for Karakura town and make contact with him, while using a device specifically made for this mission to keep the operation discreet. There is another special war power in the vicinity, so your operation must stay unnoticed. Let my son know that I shall provide some assistance in solving his current situation. If he does not seem to be convinced even after hearing that, tell him that there are things about his mother that he needs to know. You are allowed to tell him the information recorded in the data about him, minus the ones that were added in the period of 17 months. While there is no time limit to the mission, keep in mind that the earlier it is done, our chances of victory will increase drastically. Now you may leave. Yhwach waved his hand in dismissal and closed his eyes, leaning back into his throne. Soon, Father, the time for your liberation is near. I shall take my leave, Your Majesty. Rest assured, failure is not an option. The Emperor smiled at his daughter's words and replied softly, Yes, I have my utmost faith in you, my daughter. The Sternritter stood up and bowed before she left the throne room, while pondering about just what exactly was the information that would make the Shinigami's hero hate them, even more than the Sternritter already do. It must be something really horrible, I guess. Oh well, I'll know for sure when I read the daten. Her hatred for the Shinigami actually doubled in magnitude that night. Ichigo could be seen walking through the streets of Karakura town, almost on the verge of a mental breakdown. Usually he would have been mobbed by some local thugs and bullies, but no one had been bothering him recently. He didn't have his usual scowl on his face, but a pained gloomy look instead. Some of the thugs had tried to mess with him a few days ago, and everyone opted to stay out of his way after their unfortunate trip to the hospital. It had been a week since that painful night, when Ichigo had lost everything. Tsukishima did keep his word and left a letter to all his friends and family, stating that he didn't want Ichigo to be bothered with his presence, when his dislike was as clear as crystal to him. It had done exactly what Tsukishima intended to do, much to Ichigo's distress. Karen was giving him the cold shoulder, as if he wasn't even worth it to waste her time. Yuzu always looked at him disapprovingly, and reminded him about 3 times a day about how she was disappointed in him. It hurt his heart, a lot. After his mother's death, his sisters were practically the whole world to him. To see them turned against him, it was just too painful for Ichigo to withstand, or feign ignorance on the whole matter. Just how much influence did Tsukishima give to himself, when he meddled with their memories? Ichigo knew that he was going to kill that bastard someday, even if it was the last thing he would do in his life. Then, there was the matter of his father. Ichigo really couldn't believe that bastard. Not only did he actually let his sisters get caught in this whole mess, but he actually had the gall to avoid him. Ichigo loved his father dearly, even if he didn't like to show it that much. Hell, his family was everything to him, and he promised to himself to live up to his name, the #1 protector. But his father's cowardly behavior was getting on his nerves. He should have explained to him about his reasons for letting things come to this stage a long time ago. Just why didn't he protect them? They were his own children, for fuck's sake. And now, thanks to Tsukishima, his home didn't feel like one anymore. No more of his father's childish morning antics to annoy him. No more pleasant talk between the family when they ate their meals. The tension in Kurosaki household was now reaching an almost unbearable level, which actually made Ichigo to consider leaving the home for the moment. But the problem was that he had nowhere to go. Did he dare to ask help from his friends? When he got nailed in the gut by Tatsuki for being an unbearable jealous asshole, in her words, he gave up all hope on his friends for the time being. The sorrowful eyes of Urahime when she asked him the reasons to exactly why he hated Tsukishima so much. The disappointed deep baritone voice of Chad, his trust that ran deep between them now turned against him. Keigo, who told him in the face that he didn't want to be friends with an asshole like him, and Mizuhiro, who simply nodded alongside him. There was no exception to any of them. None of his friends would let him in their homes, much less let him stay over for a single night. Even if they did, the fact that they were at odds with him would make it no different from his own home. And then there was Uryu. Even Uryu was cut by Tsukishima at the end, and was actively against him now, almost like the time when he challenged him to a stupid competition for just having Shinigami powers. What made it worse was the fact that everything was his fault. If only he trusted Uryu over Ginjo. He should have listened to him when Uryu was telling the truth about him being on his side. If he trusted him like he deserved to be, there was a chance that they could have won, and everything would have been fine. When his thoughts went over to Urahara-san and Yoruichi-san, he almost punched the wall beside him. He knew that Urahara-san, no, Urahara was waiting for him to come and ask for his help. Ichigo didn't know why he hadn't approached him yet, like he used to do so, but he knew that he was running out of options. Actually, he really had no options from the beginning. Lastly but not the least, there was the matter of the Shinigami. They were there that night, and just watched from the sidelines as he suffered through everything. Everything that happened on that night was allowed to happen by the Shinigami and Urahara. It didn't take a genius to deduce that fact. If even one of the captain had come to provide some help, everything would have played out differently. Ichigo knew that Urahara probably could deal with Ginjo and Tsukishima on his own, considering how much of himself he hides under his mask. They probably had their reasons, Ichigo tried to convince himself. It was getting harder and harder as time went by. Simply put, he felt used. They discarded him because he was no longer of any use to them. No, they're just trying to keep humans out of their business, Ichigo tried to convince himself once more. But if that was the case, why were Urahime, Chad, and Uryu dealing with hollows all the time, ever since he lost his powers? At this point, he really couldn't understand anything. Everyone was keeping their secrets, and he was confused. Ichigo soon noticed where his feet carried him. It was the exact same riverside where his mother died, almost 8 years ago. The place where he last saw his mother's loving smile, albeit a little strained and painful. The last memory he had of his mother. He sat down at the riverbank, and picked up some random stones within his reach. Sometimes when he felt moody, he would come here and throw some stones at the river, counting how many times they skipped over the surface before sinking into the river. When he was in a relatively good mood, he could easily make it skip more than 10 times. None of the stones skipped more than 7 times. Ichigo let out a sigh of frustration, as his thoughts returned to the more important matters once more. There wasn't really a choice to him at this point. He had to visit Urahara Shoten, sooner or later, as much as he didn't want to. He had neither the means nor power to find a solution on his own, despite how much he loathed to admit it. But then again, when did I ever come up with a solution to anything on my own? I don't really have a choice at this point, huh? Ichigo muttered, while throwing the last stone he held. It skipped 5 times. He most certainly did not know that everything was about to change at that moment. Well, you actually do. Only if you hear me out, that is. Ichigo was about to stand up, when he heard an unfamiliar voice. It belonged to a girl who looked about his own age, give or take a year or two. Her voice was full of mischief and mirth. She was wearing some kind of uniform, and a long-sleeved white trench coat with matching white shoes. The black leggings she wore showed off her slim legs quite well, and her waist-long black hair had 2 long strands tied upwards in an antennae-like fashion. Huh, how does that even stay that way? She had a black peaked white cap with a pentacle-like symbol on the side, which was probably about the size of his fist. It was sticking out from the side of her head, completely defying gravity, which really bothered him. There was a belt with a heart-shaped buckle wrapped around her waist, that seemed to be holding something inside. And then her light bluish eyes. Gods, they're beautiful. Ichigo found himself lost in the mesmerizing pools of blue, demanding his attention. He didn't know why, but he couldn't tear his sight away from those pair of beautiful cerulean orbs. While he was completely captivated by her eyes, Giselle tilted her head to the side while wondering why Ichigo seemed to be staring at her with such fervor. She soon came to the hopeful conclusion that he just might be attracted to her, as much as unlikely it would be. This was probably the first time anyone gave her that kind of look, since she had a rather negative reputation in Silburn. It gave her a warm feeling that she had never felt before, and it made her yearn for more. But still, she was here on orders and she knew better than to put aside His Majesty's orders for her own need. And he just didn't know her true nature yet. If he did, she doubted that he would ever look at her like that again. As she pushed out her stray thoughts from her mind, her cheery demeanor returned once more. Hello, are you there? Is there something on my face? Giselle stared back at Ichigo for a while, and then came to the conclusion that if he was given an appropriate external stimulation, he would come back to his senses. So she lazily walked up to Ichigo, who kept his gaze locked onto her eyes. She stopped right in front of him and stood on her toes, since their height difference was about 9 to 10 inches. When she closed her eyes and leaned forward, Ichigo lost the sight of her eyes and came back to his senses, only for him to almost drop his jaws in shock as her soft lips made contact with his cheek. If it was on his lips he would have freaked out like he usually did, but this somewhat innocent form of affection actually made his heart flutter. Although Giselle was actually going to kiss him on the lips at first, she changed her mind at the last minute, right when she remembered the line in the Dayton about him being a prude. And it probably was a good decision too. But I wonder how it would have felt like if I didn't stop. Her cheeks blushed a little at the thought. What was that for? Ichigo spluttered in embarrassment, his face now reddened to the degree that it actually resembled a strawberry. Ah, you didn't like it? Giselle asked, her lips sticking out in a pout. Okay, it's not that I didn't like it, but seriously. What was that for? Ichigo asked, sounding a little dumb, not realizing that the blush on his face had deepened in color. Giselle couldn't help but to giggle, and sneak another peck on his opposite cheek. Ichigo sucked his breath, unsure of how to respond to the girl. Well, you were staring at me quite intensely. So I decided to wake you up, and slapping someone in the face when we just met would be quite rude of me, right? And then you were just so adorable close up, that really I couldn't help it. Giselle gushed, with a rather goofy smile on her face. Ichigo thought that it was the girl who was the adorable one, and wondered if he was actually attracted to her. In all honesty, it was a feeling that he had never felt before. Oh, it is a valid reason, I guess, Ichigo said while scratching the back of his head, his eyes looking at anywhere but the girl in embarrassment. If I'm being honest, I shouldn't complain when I did like it. Ichigo's cheeks flushed intensely when he admitted it out loud, which made the girl to giggle once more. Ichigo cleared his throat and continued speaking. So, what was that about me having a choice and hearing you out? It's not like I actually said anything about my problem, you know. Ichigo questioned in doubt. It wasn't possible for her to know about his situation, right? If it was nothing important, Then he could probably live with the fact that a cute girl did cheer him up a little at his worst hour. Maybe he could gain a new friend who didn't hate him for something he didn't do, and maybe more than that. I'm talking about you having a choice other than going to Urahara Kazuki for help, of course. Let's move on to the business, shall we? We can have our fun later. If you want to, that is. Giselle teased Ichigo lightly, but he could see the clear blush on her face. Added with the coy smile she had at the moment, Ichigo could only nod dumbly, not really trusting his mouth to form an intelligent answer. The very reason of his stupid reaction seemed to be amused at his response, which was something he could tell easily from the sound of her soft giggles. And gods, it sounded like music to his ears. Ichigo realized that he was crushing on the girl he had known for less than 5 minutes, and hard at that. The worst thing, or maybe not, was that he really didn't know why. To introduce myself, my name is Giselle Gewel, the Sternritter, Z, of the Wandenreich. I'm here on a mission under the orders of His Majesty, to recruit the #1 Special War Power Kurosaki Ichigo to our cause. His Majesty promised to provide his help on your current situation, if you decide to join the Wandenreich. As Giselle stated her purpose, more and more questions popped up in Ichigo's head. He was missing too many pieces to understand everything she said, but Ichigo tried to use his head a lot more than he used to do before the incident. Okay, first off, if your objective is to recruit me, I need to know exactly what I'm getting into. Since you know my name, and also know about Urahara, you and your... Well, you did say, His Majesty, and this, invisible empire, so I'm gonna guess that there is some kind of empire I'm clearly unaware of. This empire is obviously consisted of people who are spiritually aware, but seriously, an empire in the 21st century. Ichigo thought it was a bit outdated, but then again there was this supposed Soul King in the Soul Society, so it's not like he was supposed to be surprised that much. Sternritter of the Wandenreich, the Star-Crossed Knights of the Invisible Empire, huh? Another cool name like the Espada, but I'm not sure which one is more fancy. The Espada or the Sternritter? Ichigo thought about it for a second, and shrugged. Anyway, from the word Special War Power, I can deduce that you're obviously going to wage war, but against who? Who exactly are your people? And if you're here to recruit me, am I right to guess that you have the means to restore my powers? When Ichigo thought more about it, a part of him was worried about what would happen to him, should he refuse. He obviously didn't know about Giselle's presence until she revealed herself to him, so if she wanted to harm him in any way, then he was currently at her complete mercy. He didn't like to think that she would harm him, but then again, was this any different from how Ginjo approached him? Well, not including the kisses on his cheek, that is. He knew that it wasn't something serious in some other countries, like France for instance, so he probably shouldn't put that much meaning into that. Giselle was a foreign name, after all. Giselle was way more upfront about it. Whether I think of her company to be pleasant or not doesn't really matter, though. She's here on someone else's orders, so I might as well keep my guard up for now. Ichigo most certainly did not want a repeat performance of what had occurred barely a week ago. The information about your intelligence in the Dayton was wrong. Lower than average. Geez, what's the definition of average these days? Muttered Giselle. She then gave Ichigo her answer to his first question, with a hint of pride evident in her voice. To answer your questions, we are the sworn enemy of Hollows and protector of humankind, the Quincy. Ichigo's eyes widened at the unexpected answer. Then what about Yuryu's claim of him being the last Quincy? At first, Ichigo thought that Giselle was telling him a lie. But as he thought more about it, it didn't add up. Why would she lie to him about them being the Quincy, when they probably knew about his friendship with Uryu? Uryu doesn't know about the existence of these Quincies, or the Wandenreich. Ichigo wanted to laugh so badly, at the thought of his friend learning that he wasn't the last Quincy. It would be hilarious to see the expression on his face when that happens. He bit his lower lip to calm himself, and turned his attention to Giselle. As far as I know, the Quincies were wiped out at the hands of the Shinigami. I heard it from Uryu, who thinks he is the last Quincy. Ichigo frowned. It wasn't that he didn't believe Giselle's words. She really didn't have any reason to lie about it after all. It was an unexpected answer that caught him off guard, but he did believe her. Well, you're right and wrong at the same time. You see, About 1,000 years ago the Lichtreich, which was our kingdom at the time, declared war with the Shinigami. We Quincy prided ourselves for being honorable, and gave the Shinigami the time to prepare for war, before we attacked. But the Shinigami took advantage of it and launched a sneak attack on us with the intention to wipe us out. It was a miscalculation on our part, considering how the members of the Gote 13 at that time were animals full of bloodlust with no sense of honor. Giselle frowned when she was reminded of the heinous acts the Gote 13 had done to her kind during that time. Ichigo found himself drawn into Giselle's history lecture, even if he wasn't sure about how much of it he should believe. All of it may be a lie, or the truth. It wasn't like he had anyone to tell him otherwise, so he just decided to listen to the full story. We fought to the best of our ability, despite the fact that we already took too much damage when they first struck, and we ended up losing badly. The Quincy that survived from the war hid in the shadows with our king to bide our time. While His Majesty took a near-fatal wound from the leader of the Gote 13, he used most of his strength to bind us with the realm of shadows, thus resulting in the beginning of the Wandenreich. The massacre you probably know about was the Quincy that were currently living in the human world a few hundred years ago. I'm not sure about how much you actually know about the Shinigami, Quincy and the Soul King, but do keep in mind that the history is always written by the victors. Giselle answered in a dead serious tone. Somehow, Ichigo could tell that she really wasn't lying to him. He also had a weird feeling when he saw that her eyes were burning with hatred at the Shinigami. Was he sympathizing with her? Oh God, all this shit is really starting to give me a headache. So, the Wandenreich is going to wage war against the Soul Society again, which means that there really is a way to restore my powers. You wouldn't bother to recruit me if you didn't, and… Oh, fuck, a sudden realization struck Ichigo. If the Quincy were here to recruit him, didn't that mean I'm a Quincy? Oh, hole in one. You really are way smarter than you let on, Ichi-chan. Giselle said while maintaining her dopey smile. Ichigo's eyebrow twitched when she called him Ichi-chan, but didn't comment about it. While it was hardly an appropriate way for Giselle to address him, considering the fact that they barely knew each other, it didn't bother him as much as he thought it should have. Seriously, his infatuation was getting ridiculous at this point. So you're saying that I'm a Quincy? I also happen to know that my dad was a Shinigami. So if I really am a Quincy… Oh, Mom. Ichigo smiled softly for the first time in a week, as he learned an important piece of information about his own mother. Anything new about his mother was something he was more than happy to learn about, but it was more than just that. It felt like he had finally found out about something important to him, that was missing for all this time. If his mother was a proud Quincy, then he would gladly follow her footsteps, and become a Quincy she would have been proud of. He loved his mother that much. Although new questions kept on popping up as he gained more and more new information, he had the feeling that he probably could get the answers he so desperately wanted from Giselle. Unlike Urahara or his father who always tried to hide things from him, Giselle seemed to have no such qualms. A moment later, Ichigo scowled. He couldn't help but to growl in annoyance under his breath. And he kept something like this from me all those years. You're so dead goat-shin. The fact that his father hid something like this wasn't all that surprising, given how he also hid the fact that he himself was a Shinigami from him, even when he knew his involvement with the Soul Society for the whole time. He knew just how much Ichigo beat himself up about his mother's death being his fault when she died, and he didn't even bother tell him about his mother, something of this importance to him. The nerve of his old man. Yup. Your mom was a Quincy. Kurosaki Masaki was the last act Quincy of the Kurosaki line. In case you didn't know, Kurosaki is your mother's maiden name, not one she took after her marriage with your father. It was probably a measure to hide your father from the Soul Society, if I were to guess. And I think the rest of the story is His Majesty's to tell, so forgive me if you have more questions. Giselle flashed him an apologetic look when she said that part. Anyway, if you choose to join us, His Majesty will provide you the help you would need to reach your goals, awaken your Quincy heritage which is rightfully yours, and you'll get to see me every day. Sounds appealing. Giselle fluttered her eyelashes at the end of her proposal, which was more cute than sexy in Ichigo's opinion. Frankly, he wasn't completely convinced yet. The fact that his mother was a Quincy would have been all they needed to convince him to accept his Quincy heritage. But fighting against the Shinigami was something he simply wasn't ready to participate in, as much as he didn't trust them at the moment. Sounds great and all, but I don't know if I can fight against the Shinigami. I'm not really that comfortable with the idea, when my own father was one, and I still have my friends in the Soul Society, said Ichigo with a small frown. Ichigo was deeply conflicted. One side was his father's kind while the other was his mother's. He was on friendly terms with the Shinigami, and his human friends were also close to them. On the other hand, he wanted to become a proud Quincy like his mother. If someone actually asked him to choose between the two of his parents, his answer would always be his mother. It wasn't that his father meant that little to him, but his mother always held a special place in his heart. And even if Shinigami powers were more familiar to him, he neither knew how to regain it nor did the Shinigami wanted to help him on the matter. If they were silent for a year and a half, the answer was quite obvious, wasn't it? All in all, he really wanted to become a Quincy, but didn't want to fight the Shinigami. Just what was he supposed to do? But didn't the Shinigami abandon you, when you were no longer useful to them? You sacrificed your own powers for them, and what did they do for you in return? You probably know already that they were watching you that day, when you lost your powers for the second time. But what you didn't know, was that everything was just a plot to draw Ginjo Kugo out into the open. He's currently held in a cell in Soul Society, waiting for his trial. They didn't even bother to capture his allies, especially the one that tortured you mentally. They don't care about us humans, Ichi-chan. They eagerly slaughtered even the children, when they razed Lichtreich to the ground. Giselle exclaimed with heat, trying her best to persuade Ichigo. That is kind of sick. Do you know what happened to the Quincy that were slaughtered 200 years ago? Their souls found themselves in the Soul Society after their death, and all of them were captured for experimentation purposes by the 12th Division. If it wasn't for the fact that His Majesty was still recovering at that time, a full-out war would have started because of it. Your loyalty is admirable, Ichi-chan, but it shouldn't be placed at the Shinigami as a whole. If you wish no harm to your friends in Soul Society, join us and fight, and spare them on your own terms. Ichigo listened to Giselle's words and came to the conclusion that she just might be right. Who knows, if any Kurosakis were killed at the hands of the Shinigami? What if his own ancestors' souls were used in an experiment at the hands of the Shinigami? Considering the fact that his mother was the last Quincy of the Kurosaki line, it was a distinct possibility. He was too deep in thought, that he completely missed Giselle muttering, as if any of them deserved to be spared anyway, under her breath. I'm still not entirely certain about this, so I want to know about the special war power part first. What does that exactly mean? Ichigo asked, quite curious about what it was, and why he was labeled as one. The special war power is what His Majesty considers an individual who is capable of changing the tides of the war. His Majesty named 5 certain or possible enemies with each of their own strength. Zaraki Kenpachi's combat strength, Aizen Sosuke's spirit pressure, Hayasu Baikibe's wisdom, Urahara Kazuki's means, and the one His Majesty placed as the most potentially dangerous one. The number 1 special war power, Kurosaki Ichigo's latent ability. Giselle replied, causing Ichigo's eyes to widen in shock. Why the hell would he be placed as the most dangerous one, when he was no more powerful than the weakest hollow? Ichigo could easily understand why Zaraki Kenpachi was listed as one of them. If he actually drops his restraints, he becomes a force to be reckoned with. But even then, he didn't take his fights seriously. If he actually went full out in a fight seriously, Ichigo didn't want to be on the receiving end of his Zanpakuto. Ichigo actually shuddered, when he thought about the possibility of Zaraki succeeding to learn his Zanpakuto's name. Zaraki Kenpachi with a Shikai, or even a Bankai. It would be a living nightmare for his enemies. Hearing Aizen's name wasn't that surprising at all. Although he couldn't help but to wonder why exactly a man who was currently imprisoned in Muken was on the list in the first place, he knew just how strong Aizen really was. He had felt Aizen's Reiatsu for the first time while rescuing Rukia. Back then he wasn't fused with the Hogyoku, and yet his Reiatsu was on a whole different level, compared to most of the captains. Now fused with the Hogyoku, he could survive a clean hit with Mugetsu, the strongest technique in his arsenal when he was using the final Getsuga Tensho. And now he couldn't even use that anymore. If Aizen was somehow freed from his prison, no one in the Soul Society could defeat him, not even the head captain. Ichigo himself couldn't use the final Getsuga Tensho again, and even if he could, he would think at least twice before using it for Soul Society. Urahara Kazuki was the only person Aizen admitted to be in equal terms of intelligence, which probably meant that the other was actually above him in Aizen's case. Aizen truly did have the biggest ego he had ever seen, after all. Urahara Kazuki's inventions were something else, and he always seemed to have some kind of solution about almost every possible situation at ready. He truly was an unpredictable man, who could very well be the Joker of the Shinigami's side. Hyasu Bikeep. I've never heard of him. Can you tell me who that guy is? Ichigo asked, wondering if he was a retired captain or something like that. Well, he's probably the first Shinigami to ever exist in this world. The daten recorded about him states that he was said to be born at the same era when the Soul King was born, and that would make his age above 1 million years. A living fossil if you ask me. You do know about the Royal Guard, right? At this question Ichigo nodded his head, shocked by Giselle's revelation about the eldest Shinigami. The leader of the Royal Guard is Hyasu Bikeep. He has the knowledge about every piece of the history and secrets of the Soul Society, hence his immense wisdom. Other than that, nothing is really known. We never did see him fight for real during the First War, since. You know, Giselle replied while tinkering with a small metal cube. She noticed Ichigo's curious gaze, and held up the cube for him to observe. This is a tool that was provided for the success of this mission. It essentially blocks all attempts at eavesdropping or spying. It doesn't give away any Reiatsu while activated too. Without anything like this, I doubt that His Majesty would allow anyone to set foot in the same area where Urahara Kazuki resides in. Well, I guess you're right about that. You never know when a certain black cat will try to listen into a conversation after all. Ichigo chuckled, quite surprised at the Wandenreich's readiness. But it was to be expected when they were preparing for war for 1,000 years. Right, Shihoin Yoruichi. Her ability to shift into a cat is quite well known to us. She was spotted sneaking around the Soul Society in her cat form every few years. The Wandenreich knows almost everything that happens inside the Seraiti you know. When you first infiltrated the Soul Society, your growth of strength did surprise a few of the Ritters. Starting from a mere lieutenant level at most, reaching the level of a lower captain in short of a week. It was something unheard of, and when you fought against Aizen. Well, actually they were more surprised at the similarity between our ultimate technique and your final Getsuga Tensho. It was quite the gamble for us to gain that information, since the fight occurred outside the Seraiti, but it was totally worth it. We gained some insight of what to expect from the battle between two special war powers, all thanks to you. The Sternritter who saw the extent of your powers at the fullest won't underestimate you, even if you are currently weaker than a soldat. At that point Giselle had Ichigo's full attention, not because of her small jab at his strength. They had a technique like the final Getsuga Tensho. Giselle seemed to catch on his interest at the topic and gave him a mischievous grin. I'll tell you about it later. Just know that our technique doesn't have the loss of powers as a consequence now, and let's leave it at that. Back to what I was saying, when you used that sacrificial technique, His Majesty named you as the most dangerous of the special war powers. I think it had something to do with the potential to become a transcendent being. Oh, I wonder. Suddenly Giselle's eyes glazed over as if imagining something, and soon started to giggle madly. Ichigo had no idea what brought it up, but smiled anyway. Even if it was somewhat perverted, she was still cute all the same. Ichigo thought about what he would do, should he choose to join the Wandenreich. He would have to train harder than ever, since if he was going to become a Quincy, he wouldn't settle for anything less than the absolute best. He didn't know if he had any talent regarding archery, but if he wasn't good at it, then he was going to train until he was good at it. Unlike the time when he was a substitute Shinigami, he actually wanted to do the very best in his capability, in order to make his mother proud. Then there was the matter of war. He didn't know exactly what they were trying to achieve, but his belief in the Shinigami dwindled just enough for him to actually consider fighting against them. He would have to kill, but it probably would be the same if he was on the opposite side. And honestly, after hearing about how the Shinigami wiped out the Quincy, he didn't feel like participating in the war against them, his own kind. There was also the fact that if he were to choose one heritage over the other, he didn't want to choose the one that discarded him so easily when his use was done. While the Quincy could do the same to him, it didn't happen yet, and that was a good enough reason for him to take their side over the other. There wasn't the choice of not participating in the war. He knew that one way or another he would get dragged into it, just like how everything started in the first place. Another reason for him to take the side of the Quincy over the Shinigami was that the Emperor promised his help on his current situation. Ichigo wanted to kill Tsukishima in the most painful way possible, and remove the effects of his Fullbring from his friends and sisters. Then another problem struck him. If he decided to participate in the war, would his sisters stay out of it? If the Book of the End was cancelled, and they found out that he was missing, they would demand answers from his father. And then it will eventually lead to his sisters getting involved with the Shinigami. He knew that Karen was already somewhat acquainted with Urahara, as he had seen his sister exiting the very shop Urahara owned. He would have to ask for help on that matter, if he were to join the Wandenreich. If he was a Quincy, then his sisters shouldn't be any different, right? Maybe they could be provided protection from the war if he requested it, or his friends on that matter. What should he do if he was confronted by his father during the war? Would his father choose the Shinigami over his family like Byakuya did? Hey, Giselle, do you think that, well, this is awkward. Would His Majesty provide protection for my family and friends if I requested it? Ichigo asked uncertainly. If his family and friends' safety was guaranteed, he actually looked forward to join the Wandenreich. He was still unsure about what he would do with his Shinigami friends, but he would try his best to make sure that they lived through the war if possible. They probably would see him as a traitor, that was for sure, but that was his burden to carry. Ichi-chan, Giselle is a bit too cold. Giselle stuck out her lips that were quivering, as if to prove her point. You can call me Gigi like my friends do, Ichi-chan. And of course His Majesty would grant your request. You are a special war power. The outcome of the war could change if only one of them chose not to stand against us, but if you actually join us, the scales would be greatly tipped in our favor. Giselle exclaimed while reaching out and grasping Ichigo's hands. Now call me Gigi. Giselle stared into Ichigo's eyes, her own sparkling with amusement. All right Gigi, satisfied now, Ichigo replied with a chuckle, easily giving in to her rather cute demand. It really wasn't like him to act like this, but he couldn't help himself. Very. And I think we are about done with what I had to tell you. So, Giselle fidgeted her fingers, which were still holding onto Ichigo's hand. She then tightened her grip on his hands in anxiety. Have you made your decision, Ichi-chan? Although Giselle thought that Ichigo probably would join the Wandenreich, she really didn't want him to reconsider and choose to stay. If she were to be honest, it wasn't for the Wandenreich, but for a completely selfish reason. She wanted her, Ichi-chan, as much as, no, probably more than her, Bambi-chan. The reason she wanted Bambi-chan to be hers was that she wanted to watch her beg for her blood. Kind of a sadistic fetish, really. Ichigo on the other hand. He was an entirely different case, compared to Bambietta. No other male had given her the look he gave to her when they met earlier. It was a warm feeling she wanted to savor, and for that she wanted her, Ichi-chan, to join the Wandenreich. No, not the Wandenreich, but to join her. She didn't want him as a zombie like she would have normally preferred, but if he chose to be an enemy of the Wandenreich, the only way she could have him was making him one. And if she did, he wouldn't look at her like he did earlier, so she didn't want to do that to him. Giselle definitely wanted Ichigo alive and healthy by her side. She could only hope that he wouldn't reject her when he found about her true nature, which would be the greatest obstacle. I can't believe this, but yeah, I did. I'll join the Wandenreich, and serve under His Majesty on one condition. I'm going to have a conversation with him about what his goals exactly are, and how it'll influence the people I swore to protect. If the answer is satisfactory, His Majesty will gain a loyal subordinate. Ichigo replied and closed his eyes. Giselle was quite thankful that she didn't have to mention anything about the information about his mother he needs to know, to quote His Majesty's words. It would have disturbed Ichigo unnecessarily, and to be honest, she really wanted to be nowhere near him when he learns the truth. If I remain useful, I won't be discarded without a second thought. I'll prove myself to be useful, if only to ensure my sister's safety. Ichigo vowed to himself. His sisters were supposed to be Quincy too, so they could easily belong there. While he still had his doubts due to the Shinigami and Ginjo, he didn't think that the Soul Society would protect his sisters. Placing his bet on the Wandenreich would be a relatively safer choice for his sisters, when he succeeds in removing Tsukishima's Fullbring. Good. Now I'll get to see you every day, whenever I want to. I'm so happy. Giselle squealed and threw her arms around his neck, burying her head into his chest, causing Ichigo to blush madly. Giselle's muffled voice could be heard a moment later. We are going to leave for Silburn via the shadows. It's going to feel like taking a dip in a lake in the middle of winter, so brace yourself. Wait a minute, we are leaving now. Well, I don't really have a time limit on the mission itself, but His Majesty said that the faster I bring you to the Wandenreich, the chances of us winning the war increases drastically. And I don't think staying in the same area with Urahara Kazuki would do us any good. Do you need to take care of something before we leave? Giselle asked, looking up at Ichigo's face, admiring his looks. There really weren't many eye candies among the Sternritter, and soldats always made sure to avoid her, so she was saving every second of this moment into her memory. Ichigo wanted to say that he needed to say his farewells, but he remembered that there really were no one who would appreciate his farewells at the moment. He didn't want to take any chances with his father or Urahara, and Yoruichi-san, so that left literally no one. It's not like he had anything of worth to take with him, which made his choice all the easier. I guess we can leave right now, Gigi. My life is so fucked up at this moment. Ichigo sighed in frustration. Don't worry, Ichi-chan. Everything's gonna work out in the end, you know. If you worry too much, your handsome face will be covered with wrinkles. Ichigo let out a small laugh and wrapped his arms around Giselle. Thanks, I needed that. I'm ready. Ichigo steeled his resolve. Everything was going to be alright. He was going to make sure of it. It's no biggie. As I said, brace yourself, Ichi-chan. As soon as Ichigo complied to Giselle's advice, the shadows engulfed them. Soon there was no trace of the Sternritter and soon-to-be Quincy left at the peaceful riverside. Chapter 2. The Tower, 16. Urahara Shoten, the day Ichigo left Karakura town. Kazuki, are you really sure about this? I mean, I've seen how the kid is faring, and if we don't do something soon enough, he's gonna break. The black cat growled out while scratching the wall, irritated at the passive measures they were taking. Well, Yoruichi-san, I'm still working out a way to remove the alterations in their memory, but I'm stuck. This Fullbring really is a difficult issue, so even I'm not that sure about when I'll be able to come up with a solution. And you know what will happen should we attempt to restore Kurosaki-san's powers, as we already went through this at least once every day. The Central 46 specifically gave us the orders to leave Kurosaki-san out of the matters of the afterlife, and if we go against those direct orders, they gain the excuse to lift the pardon we received. You know that the new Central 46 are still suspicious about us. I know. And why do we even care about the consequences? It's not like we weren't exiles for the past century, Kazuki. Said Yoruichi, still scratching the wall with her razor-sharp claws. Who knows what they'll try to do with Kurosaki-san, when they do find out. I don't really understand why they are trying this hard to keep Kurosaki-san from gaining his powers again, unless there's something that they want to hide from him. Maybe they didn't want to take the risk of a powerful Shinigami, who doesn't care about their orders. Kazuki wondered out loud, scratching his chin. If I were to bet, I'd place my bet on the first one. Yoruichi grumbled. Well, if we consider the fact that Kenpachi was banned from learning any proper zanjutsu, the idea of an uncontrollable captain-level Shinigami going rogue or rebelling against them just may be one of their worries. I must say though, this pardon actually has more downs than ups. We really had much more freedom when we were exiles. Kazuki sighed, while sweat dropping at the sight of the wallpapers on his wall getting damaged by the Black Menace's claws. She really needs to stop doing that. It's not like I can use my Bankai to fix it. Benihime will never forgive me if I actually pull something like that. Kazuki couldn't help but to cringe at the thought. Why did we even agree to let the kid handle the whole situation on his own in the first place? Exclamation mark. I can understand to some extent. You were probably thinking about that folklore, Kaiser Jizong, right? The sealed Quincy king would regain his pulse after 900 years. Another 90 years and he would regain his intellect. After 9 more years he would regain his strength. It's been almost 8 years since Masaki's death, and if it really is true, then the Quincy king will return in about a year's time. Yoruichi stated, lifting her claws off the wall to show her seriousness on the particular topic. Why yes, you know me too well, Yoruichi-san. But are you sure that this really is the case? It says he would regain his strength after 9 more years, so it means either he didn't return or he already has. Kazuki nodded his head at Yoruichi's rare moment of brilliance. She was more of an instinctual person than a rational person, although it didn't necessarily mean that her intelligence was lacking in any way. Cats were clever animals, after all. I'm actually thinking about the possibility that the lines might not be the same as the original used to be. What if it was, he would regain his strength for 9 more years, and not after? We all know what happened to Kanae-san and Masaki-san, although how Ishida-san and the Kurosaki siblings weren't subjected to it is still quite the mystery to me. Kazuki stated, eliciting a nod from Yoruichi. A plausible theory, agreed Yoruichi, but Kazuki sensed a but coming from her expression. He had no idea how he could tell that, since Yoruichi was still a cat, but he could. But it is just that, a theory. Besides, I don't think Ruken would have been so sure about it, if it was a wrong version of the Kaiser Jizong he told us. And you still didn't tell me the exact reason of why you agreed to let Ichigo handle everything. Kazuki couldn't help but to gulp when he noticed Yoruichi's narrowed eyes, much more menacing than it usually was since she was currently in her feline form. He could always wiggle his way out with his cryptic words, but something told him that he wouldn't like the consequences. Well, I'm certain that the Soul Society will want Kurosaki-san's help one way or another soon enough, based on what we were expecting. I was also kind of hoping for Kurosaki-san to feel betrayed by the Soul Society, so he wouldn't try to help them should the time come. He has already done too much for them, and he isn't even in his 20s yet. Kazuki explained some of his reasons more clearly than he already did. Not to mention that they really need a harsh wake-up call, and that they deserve whatever happens to them. Aizen with the Hogyoku was more than enough of a threat to disrupt the balance of the 3 worlds, but with Yhwach, the Zero Division should be more than enough to defeat him. After all, the Zero Division wasn't even involved in the first war and Yhwach still lost. Kazuki wasn't underestimating the threat of Yhwach. He knew that the Seraiti would be decimated if they were oblivious to the upcoming war, but the Gote 13 had become lax over the years. It wasn't that he wanted the current Gote 13 to be like the original Gote 13, but everything that had happened over the past century or two made him doubt the Gote 13 greatly, or the nobles to be specific. The nobles of the Soul Society were mostly corrupt, leading to the corruption of the Central 46. The Gote 13 took orders from the Central 46, and that had become absolute. It wasn't like that in the earlier days of the Gote 13, but head Captain Yamamoto had become nothing more than a shadow that blindly follows whatever the Central 46 orders. The fact that he followed the forged orders of Central 46 under Aizen's control was a solid proof. That's kinda surprising, coming from you, Kazuki. Never knew that you cared that much about your student, said Yoruichi in a teasing manner. Well, Kurosaki-san's just different, so to speak. Yoruichi wasn't oblivious to Kazuki's thoughts. They grew up together, and were nearly inseparable throughout their whole life. It wasn't a romantic sense of relationship they had, but if someone were to ask Yoruichi a question about the person she trusted her life with the most, the answer would be obvious. Their bond was much more than that of a close friend, but something more, soulmates if she was feeling generous. Although since we are actually souls, the term is anything but special in a literal sense. Shit, Kazuki is rubbing off on me. So, you think that the Gote 13 won't be able to deal with the Quincy's on their own, stated Yoruichi. She herself knew that to be a fact, with all the events that had occurred in the past few years. Some human teenagers storming the Soul Society was a ludicrous thought, even with a little guidance on her part. Sure, Aizen wanted that to happen, and used it to his advantage. But it didn't change the fact that the current Gote 13 was a laughingstock compared to the founding members, or even when she herself was a captain. I do. Kazuki agreed without hesitation. As much as I agree with you, Kazuki, I can't help but to ask this. Have you thought about how Ichigo would feel about our actions? He probably thinks that we let all that shit happen to him a few days ago, and we did. Yoruichi face-pawed when she saw Kazuki's stupid expression upon hearing her words. Oh god, you out of all people, actually didn't think about it. You idiot, I'm gonna visit him tonight and give him some long overdue explanations, and that's final. If you dare say no. Yoruichi stuck out her claws, daring him to say otherwise. Yes, I think you are right, Yoruichi-san. Please don't hurt me. Kazuki cowered at Yoruichi's menacing glare, but it didn't stop him from throwing in some firewood. Although I can't help but to wonder, what was Isshin-san thinking, when he agreed to this? Yoruichi face-pawed once more, muttering, "Men," under her breath. I've had enough of Isshin trying to hide here, in order to avoid his own son anyway. I hope Ichigo kicks his ass for what he did, Yoruichi said while thinking about her favorite pupil. While she cared about both of her pupil fairly, Ichigo was way more fun, due to his reaction when she teased him. Soy Fawn basically worshipped everything she did except abandoning her, so it really wasn't all that fun anymore. Little did they know, that the bus had already left when they finally decided to take it. Silburn, personal quarters of the Sternritter, Z. Gah, that was fucking freezing, Gigi. Ichigo cried out as he stumbled out of the shadows, which amused Giselle greatly. Well, there is a reason we all wear this uniform, other than to show that we are a member of the Wandenreich. It's unbearably cold around here, not only when we travel through the shadows. Silburn itself is freezing all the time, considering how it basically exists within the realm of the shadows. Our uniform is embedded with a special type of reishi which is resistant to the shadows, so you'll have to wear one if you don't want to feel that again. Giselle said while moving towards her bed, where a set of neatly folded male uniform was lying on top of it. Ichigo arched his brows when he noticed this. Were they really that confident, that he would accept their offer? This was something I requested before I left for the human world. It's the standard male Sternritter uniform, and if you want to change the style you'll have to become a full-fledged Sternritter first. The same goes with the cloaks, but it's something only a Sternritter can wear, said Giselle, while picking up the uniform. She noticed the look Ichigo was giving her, and added with a blush. I thought that a high-priority recruit like you will make it into our ranks easily if given time. This was made based on the observation records in the Dayton, so while it isn't perfect, it'll fit you just enough to feel comfortable. I didn't expect it to be ready, but oh, well. And pray tell, what do you mean by that? Ichigo said while rubbing his temple, when he heard Giselle giggle in a perverse manner. He could easily tell when someone was teasing him, or was about to do so. He was used to it because of Yoruichi-san after all. Well, if it wasn't ready, then you would have been freezing. And then you would have no choice, but to join me in my bed. Giselle replied with a suggestive grin on her lips, while the blush on her cheeks reddened in color. Ichigo noticed this little detail, despite the same blush that was spreading like wildfire on his own cheeks. Ichigo didn't voice it aloud, but he knew that he wouldn't mind, as long as anything overly inappropriate didn't happen. He wasn't ready to play her game yet, despite how much he actually enjoyed her flirting, not that he would admit it or anything. It wasn't like when Rangaku or Yoruichi flirted with him, since there was a major difference. Ichigo could tell that Giselle was genuinely trying to flirt with him, unlike the other two, who were more intent on teasing him. So, where should I change? Ichigo trailed off while averting his eyes, since he really didn't want to see Giselle's expression at the moment. He just knew that it would be an embarrassing moment for him, if he did see her expression. Ah, fine, I'll just wait outside. Talk about the tail wagging the dog. Just to let you know, if you take too long I'm gonna take a peek. Giselle placed the set of uniform in his hands, and left the room while giggling, leaving Ichigo alone in her personal quarters. Ichigo decided to not take any chances. He hastily slipped on the plain white long-sleeve shirt with a thin blue cross running down the center, and matching white trousers. Then, he slipped the black leather belt with a white belt buckle around his waist, and slid his feet into the white military boots. To his surprise, it actually fit more comfortably than the shoes he usually wore. Just enough to feel comfortable. That's the understatement of the century, Ichigo thought to himself, draping the thigh-length double-breasted trench coat, which was unsurprisingly white, around him. He wondered if he should put on the cap or not for a moment. Ichigo shrugged and put it on, thinking, why not? As Ichigo checked out his overall appearance in front of a full-body mirror, he had to admit to himself that it honestly suited him better, way better compared to the black Shinigami Shihakusho. Although there were some minor changes he would like to add, Giselle did say he needed to become a full-fledged Sternritter to earn that right. If my hair was a bit longer, it would look pretty badass. Ichigo mused to himself. He didn't know exactly why, but the thought of growing his hair was appealing to him. Maybe it had something to do with the fact that he actually did look badass when he used Mugetsu. But seriously, what's with all these red stains? Ichigo muttered, and picked up a cylinder-shaped vial filled with some kind of red liquid. It didn't take him long to realize that it was blood. The fuck? Why would she store blood in a vial? Ichigo wondered, thinking that something was off about the situation. It's not like Giselle was a vampire or something like that, right? Sure, there were weirder things than a vampire which he knew for a fact that existed, but a vampire. Maybe he was overthinking things. It was precisely that moment when Giselle entered the room with another person. He was a tall man with long blonde hair almost stretching down to his waist, and about a head taller compared to Ichigo. His light green eyes and blonde eyelashes gave him an exotic look, and Ichigo could easily admit that he was probably the most handsome man he had ever seen. "Oh, I see you dressed." "Oh." Giselle's smile faltered, and her head dropped when she saw Ichigo holding the vial of her blood in his hand. She knew that this was inevitable for her, but she most certainly didn't want it to happen this soon. What would his reaction be, when she told him that it was her own blood? How would he react when he learned the nature of her shrift? Giselle was almost panicking, when she heard Ichigo's calm voice. "I'm not going to judge you before you tell me anything, Gigi." Giselle's head shot up when Ichigo still called her Gigi, and she saw the look in his eyes. They weren't filled with disgust or any kind of emotion that would have upset her. Was Ichigo giving her a chance? "Well, I've done enough of jumping to conclusions to cover a lifetime," Ichigo sheepishly admitted while scratching the back of his neck. "As I said, until you tell me the full version of your story, I won't think any different of you. I promise." Giselle couldn't believe what she was hearing. She gaped at the orange-haired teen in shock, and shut her eyes after a few seconds. Ichigo noticed the tear drops that had formed on the corner of her eyes, but decided against saying anything. She took a few deep breaths, and eventually calmed down enough to give Ichigo an appreciative nod, along with a watery smile. Ichigo noticed that it was the most genuine expression he had seen on her face, and returned a faint smile of his own. He then turned his attention to the other person in the room, who seemed to be somewhat amused at their interaction. Ichigo wasn't entirely sure about his observation due to the man's stoic demeanor, but he had a feeling that the said person was indeed amused. "I doubt that it would be proper for an emperor to visit his subordinates or a soon-to-be one personally, so I'm gonna guess that you're one of the Sternritter. I have no idea if you knew of her mission or not, so I'll introduce myself first. The name's Kurosaki Ichigo, and I don't have any fancy titles to add to that. Pleasure to meet you." Ichigo spoke firmly, extending his arm. Jugram Hashwald eyed the orange-haired teen cautiously. He was on his way to one of the training grounds to see if anyone was up for a spar, when Giselle suddenly appeared from nowhere, and grabbed him. She then started to drag him to her personal quarters without giving any choice on the matter. The girl rambled on and on, about how she succeeded the mission His Majesty assigned yesterday, and how she must have broke the time record. She stated that even he would be surprised at what she had achieved, which caught his interest. At that point, Jugram tuned out her voice and wondered just what this mission could possibly be, if she was dragging him to her personal quarters with such enthusiasm. While his physical appearance was the same as the time when he was a young man, his age was well over 1,000 years. There really wasn't anything that could surprise him, until now. Jugram's eyes widened in surprise as he heard the unexpected name. "Kurosaki Ichigo. Giselle Gewel, if this is some kind of joke." Giselle narrowed her eyes, and interrupted Jugram before he even had the chance to finish his words. "You of all people should know that I wouldn't dare to joke with anything that is remotely involved with His Majesty. Jugram realized that he had struck her nerve when he heard the girl's indignant response. Giselle rarely showed anger to anyone, and he had made her do so by doubting her loyalty to His Majesty. What was worse about the act was that he would have felt the same rage if someone were to say that to him in this situation. "I apologize for degrading your honor. It was uncalled for, and won't happen again. I was quite surprised to hear that name in Silburn, especially in person. I shall accept one request of any kind within reason, if only to make up for my mistake," said Jugram, who dipped his head in a small bow to show that he was being genuine. Giselle glared at Jugram for a moment, and nodded her head to show that she acknowledged his apology. Jugram turned back to Ichigo, who had been silently watching the situation, and spoke in his usual collected demeanor. "I also owe you an apology for placing you in such an uncomfortable position," said Jugram, earning a surprised look from Ichigo, since he certainly wasn't expecting an apology. "While I doubt that anyone would have expected to see you in Silburn, including myself, I still feel compelled to ask for your forgiveness." Ichigo didn't really need an apology, but he could easily tell that the man in front of him was an honorable person. "I appreciate it, but it isn't necessary. So, feel like introducing yourself?" Jugram glanced at Ichigo inquisitively, unsure of what to think of the former substitute Shinigami. Nevertheless, Ichigo had yet to retract his outstretched hand, so he reacted accordingly, exactly what was expected of him. "The Sternritter Grand Master, Jugram Hashwalt. I do have some titles to add, but I pride myself in my position as the Grand Master the most," said Jugram, while he reached out and shook Ichigo's hand firmly. "Considering your current attire, am I right to guess that you are here to serve under the banner of His Majesty? And may I ask your reasons, if it does not bother you?" Jugram narrowed his eyes a little when he asked the question, knowing that if Kurosaki Ichigo had his own agenda that would induce any kind of harm to His Majesty, it was his duty to prevent it before anything could happen. Ichigo could sense the suspicion radiating from the blonde, which didn't surprise him. His position as the Grand Master of the Sternritter obviously indicated that he held a high position in the Wandenreich, so he would be worried if the man immediately started to trust him. "Yeah, well, your guess is partially right. I am going to join the Wandenreich under the sole condition that His Majesty provides me some answers to a few questions of mine, regarding our future plans. As for the reason I decided to join, His Majesty promised his help on my little problem, but if I were to be honest, it would be to follow my mother's footsteps as a proud Quincy," Ichigo replied truthfully, and added another piece. "I can understand where you are coming from, but I do not have any reason to oppose His Majesty at the moment. Plus, I doubt that His Majesty would have tried to recruit me, should I have any reason to oppose him within his empire." "I see." Jugram nodded while pondering about the information he had. Does he not know about His Majesty's involvement with his mother's death? Or was there a change to the situation that I was unaware of? Jugram cleared his thoughts, and came to the conclusion that if His Majesty thought it would be safe to recruit him, there would be a good enough reason for it. He was an advisor, but His Majesty was more than capable enough to make such important decisions on his own. "Follow me if you wish to meet His Majesty. There is still some time left before the night comes, so I see no problem on the matter." As Jugram turned around and started to walk away, Ichigo couldn't help but to wonder. Exactly why did Jugram's wording sounded like there would be a problem meeting the Emperor if it was nighttime? It wasn't like the Emperor needed his beauty sleep, right? Ichigo and Giselle followed Jugram, as he led them through the wide halls of Silburn. Ichigo was in awe at the sight of the frozen palace, as he observed the surroundings while the three made their way to the throne room. The palace was quite beautiful in its own right, although if it wasn't the uniform he currently had on himself, Ichigo doubted that it would be anywhere near pleasant. "Hashwalt-san, I have a few questions regarding the Sternritter if you don't mind answering," asked Ichigo, receiving a small nod from Jugram. Ichigo glanced at Giselle, who had been keeping to herself for quite some time, and started to ask his questions. "I heard from Gigi that this Dayton holds information about me. Am I correct to assume that this Dayton holds information about our potential enemies? And if that's the case, how strong are the Sternritter compared to the captains of the Gote 13? In a non-biased manner, that is. Oh, I'd like to know the numbers of the Sternritter too, if it wouldn't be a problem." Jugram stopped in his tracks for a few seconds with a thoughtful expression, and came to the conclusion that it wouldn't hurt to tell Ichigo some information about themselves. Especially when he was constantly making the effort to adjust himself into the empire, which pleased him to no end. Also, Ichigo didn't seem like the type to use the information against them in his opinion, which meant that he didn't look like the backstabbing kind. Yes, our Dayton does hold information about almost every Shinigami above 5th seat officers, observed from the shadows over the years. The abilities of the enemy's Shikai and Bankai that could be observed in the Seraiti. Every invention that was made in the R&D department, along with their current ongoing projects. We knew what Aizen was doing all those years before he defected, which the Shinigami obviously did not. We've seen what kind of vile experiments were done under the current 12th Division captain. At this point Giselle's eyes lit up with silent fury. Oh, when we start the war, I know exactly where and who I'm going to deal with. As for the strength of our Sternritter, it wouldn't be wrong of me to assume that most of them are above captain level, if I were to be honest. Although I am unsure of how they would fare against the more experienced and stronger captains, such as the captains of the 4th, 8th, 13th divisions, they will not have any problems facing the other captains. Jugram answered Ichigo's question honestly, and Ichigo's eyes widened in surprise upon hearing an unexpected name, who had been included as one of the stronger captains category. Say, when you say the 4th Division captain, you're talking about Unohana Retsu, right? I didn't even know that she was capable of fighting, much less being one of the stronger captains. She was really kind and sweet when she treated my wounds, and she seemed so harmless with the way she disliked conflicts. Ichigo trailed off, and a realization hit him. So, there was a reason she could easily scare the other Shinigami with her intimidating smile. There was a time when Unohana Retsu was known as the most bloodthirsty murderer to ever exist in the Soul Society. During the First War 1,000 years ago, she went by the name Yakiru Kenpachi, the first Kenpachi. I've seen her smile, while covered in our soldat's blood with my own eyes. We do not know exactly what event caused her to let go of her sword and learn the art of healing, but we believe that she will raise her sword once more, should the time of war comes. Jugram replied, not that surprised about the fact that Ichigo didn't know of the 4th Division captain's capability. It wasn't a well-known fact in the Soul Society, seeing how most of the younger captains didn't even know about her past. He was a participant in the war 1,000 years ago. He barely looks a few years older than me. Ichigo thought to himself in surprise. The first Kenpachi, huh? Yeah, I remember hearing about the fact that the title of Kenpachi is a hereditary name, and that every Kenpachi killed the former in battle to take the title. I wonder how she's still alive, if she was the first Kenpachi. Ichigo voiced his question about the matter, which was answered by Giselle. Well, obviously, it must be something connected with the very event that made her forsake fighting, and choose to heal people instead of killing them. I knew that, Ichigo muttered under his breath in a pouting manner which made Giselle giggle. Still, Ichigo was glad that the girl seemed to have recovered from her emotional state. He didn't want to see her like that. To further answer your original question, with the exception of those three, plus Yamamoto Genryusai Shigekuni and Zaraki Kenpachi, most of the other captains and lieutenants won't be able to gain the upper hand against the Sternritter, if not all. More so, when the numbers of our Sternritter outnumbers the Shinigami captains by twofold. While their head captain is truly on a whole different level, His Majesty will be able to defeat him for certain, especially when he has decided against asking for Inoue or Hime's help on restoring his missing limb, all for the sake of his foolish pride, said Jugram. Huh, yeah, I never really understood why they wouldn't ask for Inoue's help. With her ability, she could have restored his arm, and probably heal Captain Yukitaki's disease too. Ichigo nodded in agreement. Indeed, Zaraki Kenpachi cannot utilize his Zanpakuto's abilities, so although one of the preparations we have planned for the war will be rendered useless against him, one of the elite Sternritter is assigned with the task to face him in the war. We weren't entirely certain about the outcome, but I do not think it would be a problem to us anymore, since another special war power has decided to join us. As another special war power, you will be able to defeat him if given enough time for your holy training. The real problem is not the Gote 13. Jugram grimaced for a second, as he thought about the real threats. They would prove to be a bigger hindrance than the Gote 13, but he did not doubt their chances of victory. What is this real problem, as you put it? The only threat I can think of is, oh. It didn't take long for Ichigo to figure it out. You mean the Royal Guard. Giselle told me about Hyasub Ikebe, and since we lost the first war badly, there wouldn't be any solid information about the Royal Guards. The only thing I actually know about them is the rumor about the Royal Guard being stronger than the whole Gote 13 combined. Ichigo understood where Jugram's concern was coming from. But at the same time, Ichigo was worried about another matter. He could tell from the name, Royal Guards, that they would only interfere if the Soul King was under any kind of threat. But why would the Wandenreich target the Soul King? It was one of the questions he wanted to ask the Emperor. If their goals are anything like Aizen. Ichigo was brought out of his thoughts upon hearing Jugram's reply. Yes, your assumption is correct. But there is also the possibility of the Gote 13 releasing Aizen Sosuke from his prison if they feel threatened enough, said Jugram, and Ichigo thought for a second that Jugram was joking. He almost cursed out loud, when he realized that the man was indeed serious. I sincerely hope not. I sacrificed my powers once to save their ass from him, and if they just let him out to fight a war for them, my sacrifice would have been for nothing. Jugram almost pitied the misguided Quincy, since he was quite certain that Aizen Sosuke would prove to be the most dangerous foe in the upcoming war. The Shinigami didn't hesitate to use underhanded tactics, so the older Shinigami would have no such qualms about releasing Aizen to fight for them in a time of crisis. For your last question about the numbers of the Sternritter. The Sternritter are each given a letter from His Majesty, which is the equivalent of the English alphabet. Currently, there is no Sternritter, A, but there are two Sternritters who hold the Y. I am the Sternritter, B, while Giselle Gewel is the Z. That makes the number of our Sternritters the total of 26. If you prove yourself worthy enough to join our ranks, it will raise our number to 27. Ichigo's jaw dropped, as he thought about the raw power of 26 captain-level Quincy, along with their emperor whose power would be more than enough to defeat the head captain. The Gote had struggled against the Espada, and now they would have to face an enemy on the same level with twice the number. Well, shit. On top of that, the Shinigami doesn't even know about the existence of the Wandenreich, much less our strength. I'd say that all things considered, our chances on this war is extremely high. Indeed, for that reason, our concerns were mainly focused on the special war powers and the Royal Guards. Your presence here greatly lifts our burden of facing more unpredictable enemies. Also, His Majesty will be quite relieved to know that he wouldn't have to face one of his own children as a foe, Jugram said, glad that Ichigo seemed to be quite willing to fit into the empire. It showed from his usage of words, such as, our, we, and, His Majesty. Jugram smiled softly at the thought of His Majesty gaining another loyal Sternritter under his banner. As a gemist Quincy who hadn't been subjected to the Oswalin, Ichigo would most likely hold more potential than most of the Ect Quincy, so his blood status was of no concern. After a rather lengthy walk with some more conversation, the group had arrived at the hall that led entrance to the throne room. That was when a rough voice could be heard. Oi, Jugo, up for a little spar. Ho, are my eyes malfunctioning? 'Cause I see someone, who I would have never imagined to meet in Silbern out of all places, not even in my dreams. Is he, the, Kurosaki Ichigo? Jugram couldn't help but to sigh in annoyance. It was just their unfortunate luck to meet him, out of all the people they could have met right in front of the throne room. I don't really know about the Kurosaki Ichigo part, but if you're asking about my name, then I'd say that I am Kurosaki Ichigo. Ichigo replied, while he observed the red-haired man, wondering why all the people he met who had red hair also liked to adopt a weird hairstyle. Renji's hair looked like a pineapple, while this guy's hair resembled a rooster's comb. Oh, it's mohawk style. At least his hairstyle does suit him. Still, weird. Ichigo kept his thought to himself, since he knew better than to voice his thoughts about other people's appearance. He had learned that out of experience, after all. Now when did this happen, I wonder? The name's Buzzard Black, Sternritter, H. And I'm proud to say that I'm the hottest guy in Silbern. But you can call me Baz B. I'm gonna look forward to have a spar with you, Kurosaki. Seems like you have some business with His Majesty, so I'm not gonna hold you guys. See ya. Bazz-B left almost as fast as he suddenly appeared, and Ichigo wasn't sure if he should be glad that another Sternritter seemed to accept him easily, or worried that his first words held too much similarity to Zaraki. Well, at least he worded it as a spar instead of a fight, right? I wasn't really expecting our residence rooster to leave that easily. The usual Bazz-B would have said things like, "You don't look that strong in my opinion," or something like that. Giselle said with a thoughtful expression. So did I, but it seems that he was in a good mood. It is a good thing for us, as he is usually the epitome of annoyance. Jugram stated while continuing to walk towards the throne room. You never refuse when he asks you to spar with him. Giselle drawled out, knowing that Jugram and Bazz-B were friends, even before the forming of the Wandenreich. If I refuse, he will never stop chasing me around. Jugram closed his eyes to show that he won't take any retorts on the matter. More like you enjoy beating the shit out of Bazz-B's annoying ass. Giselle retorted, completely ignoring his gesture. Jugram tried to ignore her words in response, but ended up grunting in agreement. At this point, Ichigo couldn't help but let out a chuckle. To see the seemingly emotionless man acknowledge Giselle's retort was absolutely hilarious, that he really couldn't help it. We have arrived. While I will not ask for you to show the same respect as we do, please refrain from acting in a disrespectful manner. Jugram warned Ichigo. He received a salute from the soldat on guard duty, which he returned with an acknowledging nod. Please, I'm not that stupid, or at least not anymore. Ichigo grimaced as he thought about the event that caused him to change. Still, the fact that he was able to change a little for the better cut off the depressing memory. If you really thought that I would dare to show any form of disrespect to His Majesty, I can honestly say that I do not want to know my reputation among the Sternritter. I know when I must be respectful, and when I don't need to. I usually just choose not to, but I can, and will show respect in this case, so you need not worry. Sir Grand Master. Jugram's eyes twitched at Ichigo's small jab at his mention of disrespectful manner, by addressing him in a formal way that he last heard a few decades ago. Jugram nodded, acknowledging Ichigo's ability to show proper respect if needed be. Ichigo understood the difference between this situation, and him not addressing the head captain of the Gote 13 in a respectful manner. He was never a member of the Gote, and he never would be, which meant that he really wouldn't have any problems if he didn't respect the head captain, except earning the ire of a few people. In this case, he was basically pledging his loyalty to the Emperor, and it was required of him to show proper respect. Then follow me, said Jugram, with a nod. The three Quincy entered the wide-open doors, and Ichigo's eyes almost bulged out at the sight of the Emperor's appearance. Zangetsu. Thankfully Ichigo didn't make the mistake of voicing it out loud. But now, he was curious about just why in the hell the Emperor looked like an older version of Zangetsu. He could think of a theory, but he wouldn't know the truth unless Zangetsu himself confirmed it. Jugram walked up to the Emperor and knelt down from some distance, Giselle following suit. Ichigo mimicked their actions almost flawlessly, to the surprise of the other Sternritter. Yhwach raised his brows at this, since he did not expect Giselle to succeed in her mission this soon. He was also mildly shocked that his son, who had been born in the darkness, would actually show him such respect. Considering his disrespectful behavior towards the Shinigami captains, he would have let it slide should he show a little disrespect. His lips curled up in satisfaction, since it seemed that there was no need for him to do so. I have come to report the success of the mission I was entrusted with, Your Majesty. Kurosaki Ichigo has decided to join the Wandenreich on his own will, under the condition that he be allowed to ask a few questions concerning our future actions, which are to be answered truthfully. I have kept my words as promised, Your Majesty. Giselle reported with a hint of pride, which made Ichigo roll his eyes. It's not like I was that hard to convince. Yhwach eyed the orange-haired teen who fit the Wandenreich uniform perfectly in his eyes. Ichigo would most definitely make a fine addition to his ranks if he made sure of his loyalty, and from his earlier show of respect he would prove to be quite loyal too. And he wouldn't have ordered his Sternritter to bring him to Silbern if he wasn't sure of the chances. We meet at last, Kurosaki Ichigo, my son born to darkness. I am the Emperor of the Wandenreich, father of the Quincy, Yhwach. If that is what you wish, I shall gladly grant your request. Even if you did not set the request as a condition to join the Empire, I intended to have a conversation with you in the first place, considering how you seem to be unaware of the information that would change your view on the Shinigami. Yhwach closed his eyes, as he thought about the horrendous acts the Shinigami have done to his children. We need not drag this matter any longer than necessary. I shall answer your questions without any deceptions, and I swear it on my honor as the father of Quincy. Do you wish to keep the contents of this conversation personal? No, Your Majesty. I do not mind their presence. My first question is, exactly who, no, what is the Soul King? What are your intentions concerning him? Ichigo asked, thinking about the words that Urahara once said to Aizen. Urahara stated that the Soul King was the linchpin, and how the world would collapse if he ceases to exist. If that was true, wouldn't anyone who intends to harm the Soul King ultimately cause their own downfall? Straight to the most important question, I see. It seems that you do possess the knowledge, that if anything were to happen to the Soul King the world will collapse. Ichigo nodded to Yhwach's question, who had a thoughtful expression on his face. You are correct about the matter. If the Soul King is killed or freed from his shackles, the world will return to its original state, where there were no boundaries dividing the world into three. The world without the fear of death. But it wouldn't last forever. Yhwach couldn't hold his grimace as he thought about his original goals. They were the ones of a conqueror, not a ruler. What was the meaning of conquering the world, to have it collapse afterwards? What do you mean by, freed from his shackles, Your Majesty? Ichigo still remembered some of the words that Aizen said to Urahara, something along the lines of, how could you stand to serve under such an abomination? Or how, a victor should speak not of the world as it is, but of the world as it should rightfully be, which he hadn't thought about that deeply during that time. Would he finally get the answers to why exactly Aizen wanted to replace the Soul King that desperately? The Soul King. He was a god, betrayed by the former 5 nobility of the Soul Society, currently 4, as the Shiba were on rocky grounds ever since they became involved with what they call Ryoka, and was finally removed after Shiba Isshin went Mia. And yes, he is your very own birth father. Ichigo gasped at the newfound information about his family, this time his father. He did know that his father was a captain when he served in the Gote 13, but he didn't know that his surname was Shiba. Did that mean he was actually related to Shiba Ganju, or Kukaku on that matter? The thought of being related to Ganju was quite disconcerting to him, but he wished that he could have gotten to know Kukaku better. He now understood why some of the Shinigami commented about his resemblance to the deceased lieutenant of the 13th Division, Shiba Kyan. They were actually related through blood, so it was hardly surprising if he thought about it. The Soul King was born in the world before it was properly formed, when everything was in chaos. He's the father of all beings, be it Quincy, Shinigami, or even the ones you know as Fullbringers. He was an almighty being, who established order in the world by giving the world the circulation of Reishi, who took up the mantle of the protector of the world, only to be betrayed by the 5 nobility, said Yhwach, upholding his impassive expression. Ichigo wasn't sure of what to make of it, and glanced at Giselle and Jugram. He could tell that they had heard of this before, from the indifference in their expressions. As you already know, we Quincy completely obliterate the hollow soul instead of purifying them like the Shinigami do. But originally, it was the power of the Soul King. When he protected the humans and souls by destroying the hollows, the balance started to crumble, slowly leading the world to its inevitable destruction. It was then that the founders of the 5 nobility came up with the idea of splitting the world into 3 parts, by sealing the Soul King as a linchpin to retain the balance of the 3 worlds. Each had their own agenda. Kuchiki wanted more order in the world of chaos. Shihoin wanted more circulation in the stagnant world, thus ultimately yearning for the separation of life and death. Shiba pitied the poor souls who became hollows only to be obliterated, and wanted to help their souls by purifying them. Tsunayashiro. At this point Yhwach gritted his teeth in fury. The accursed name always left a bad taste in his mouth. Tsunayashiro was the one who originally came up with the idea of sealing the Soul King, in order to use his powers for their own benefit. He was a backstabbing coward, afraid of the Soul King's almighty powers, even in his sealed state. They cut off the limbs, and ripped out the internal organs of the Soul King out of fear, that one day he would break free from their shackles and punish them. Tsunayashiro spread it all over the world afterwards. I wish to free him from his shackles, the never-ending humiliation he has been subjected to. Do you see it now, Ichigo? I am the father of Quincy, but I too, was born from one. The Soul King is my father, the god of Quincy, the All-Father. An uncomfortable silence fell upon the throne room, the moment Yhwach spoke of those words. Yhwach waited patiently for Ichigo to digest the information, which was followed by the two Sternritter. I see. Ichigo actually understood the Emperor to some degree. It made sense, that he wouldn't want to see his father being used like a mere tool, at the hand of their enemies no less. So this feud between the Shinigami and our kind, started from what they did to the Soul King. On the other hand, Ichigo also understood the five nobilities' perspective. They wished to prevent the destruction of the world, and he could respect that somewhat. Tsunayashiro, he could not. Maybe that was why the Emperor seemed to be neutral towards the other four. The very first sin the Shinigami committed to our kind is the sealing of our god, and using him to shape the world into their own vision. They became the enforcer of balance in the world they had shaped to fulfill their own tastes, and wanted us to stop protecting humans. Naturally, it did not end well, said Yhwach. It was then, that a question suddenly struck Ichigo. But how could they seal the Soul King, if he was the almighty being? The Urahara, answered Yhwach, which caused Ichigo to blink in surprise. The last of the five nobility, Urahara. The one who had a mind that could come up with the means to trap even an almighty being. That was how. His reason to participate in the act, was to test the limits of his capability, to see if he was capable of outsmarting an almighty being. There is only one lasting member of the line left, and you are already well acquainted with him. If he was being honest, Ichigo wasn't really surprised that one of Urahara's ancestor had a hand in the sealing of the Soul King. The reasoning wasn't all that different from what Urahara Kazuki would have came up with, after all. When Urahara explained his reasons that lead to the creation of the Hogyoku, Ichigo didn't believe a word of it. He now knew that it ran in his blood. I will free the Soul King from his humiliating state, even if it means that I must put an end to my father's existence, with my own hands. Yhwach concluded. I understand your reasons, your majesty. But then, what was Aizen's reasons to turn his back on the Shinigami? To become a god. If being the Soul King means to be sealed as a linchpin that sustains the world, why would he want to? Ichigo's eyes widened in realization, as he could finally piece everything together from what he had heard from Yhwach and Aizen himself. The Soul King was the god of Quincy, sealed and mutilated by the very founders of the Shinigami. Aizen wanted to stand above all, in the heavens. He couldn't bear the thought of serving a Quincy, who had been split into pieces by his own predecessors. Ichigo whispered with the understanding of what kind of man Aizen Sosuke truly was, a megalomaniac who could not accept to serve under such an abomination, to quote his words. You seem to be much more perceptive than I had expected, based on the data we had in the Daten. For your unspoken question, I wished to return the world to its original state at first, when I decided to liberate my father. But I came to the realization after watching my children being slaughtered at the hands of the Shinigami during the First War, that I do not wish to see the world collapse, as it would mean the end for my children. No, the world will be sustained, even after we free the All-Father. Did you know that there are currently 3 beings, who could replace the Soul King? Yhwach asked, not really expecting Ichigo to come up with an answer. He was pleasantly surprised when he actually did. Aizen Sosuke, and myself. Would it be right of me to presume that the last one would be yourself, your majesty? Ichigo asked, almost certain that what he spoke was the truth. Yes, you're correct. I am quite pleased that you have decided to use your intelligence, instead of neglecting it. To replace the Soul King, one must be a transcendent being in order to sustain the weight of the 3 worlds. Aizen Sosuke is already on the verge of becoming one, as the Hogyoku granted his wish to overstep the boundary that divides Hollows and Shinigami. All he needs is a little push. Ichigo, you became one during the time when you used your sacrificial technique to defeat Aizen. Your unique heritage consisting of all 3 major aspects of the soul allows it. I, myself will become one once more when we commence with the war, as I am the Soul King's consciousness. Yhwach smirked when he started to reveal his real plan. Ichigo wasn't sure if he should be offended at Yhwach's jab at his intelligence, but he shrugged it off, knowing that it was indeed the truth. Instead of saying anything, he patiently waited for Yhwach to finish talking. We shall grant Aizen Sosuke's wish to replace the Soul King, but not as a being above all existence, not the way he wanted to become. He will be sealed as the new linchpin of the world, where the Shinigami will no longer be the enforcer of the balance. The Quincy will take the mantle of the protector of the world once more. As Yhwach concluded, Ichigo now knew that he could fully pledge his allegiance to the Emperor. He could feel his Quincy blood demanding him to free the Soul King from his eternal humiliation, from the moment he had learned the full truth. From this moment onward, I shall be yours to command, as it is my duty as a Quincy. I am deeply ashamed that I was unaware of my heritage to this day, and I shall prove my worth if only to atone for my ignorance. Ichigo didn't really know what he was saying since it came out naturally, influenced by his Quincy blood. He didn't realize it himself, but the two Sternritter and the Emperor were quite surprised, when jagged lines of red ran through his body the moment he swore his loyalty. Yhwach understood that Ichigo's Quincy blood awoke on its own, since he was in close contact with two of the Sternritter and the most powerful Quincy himself. It did save the trouble of restoring his powers, although it wasn't a difficult process. Taxing, yes, but not at all difficult. Yhwach only hoped that his hollow side wouldn't emerge, since the two would most likely clash in a violent manner. Blood artery, but how? Giselle questioned in awe, knowing that it just wasn't possible for a gemist Quincy to use the blood abilities without any kind of training. Only Ect Quincy were able to utilize the blood naturally, and there was no exception to this. Not a single exception throughout the history of Quincy, which had just happened for the first time. Impossible. Being born between a Quincy and a Shinigami should make the child between them a gemist, not an Ect, especially when the Quincy was a gemist at the time of birth. Jugram stared with confusion evident in his usually calm eyes. He had suspected Ichigo to be a strong gemist, possibly stronger than some Ect, but still a gemist. Rise, Kurosaki Ichigo. You show great promise, my son born to darkness. I can see that you shall achieve greatness with the proper guidance, and I intend to give you just that. The blood technique, blood vein and blood artery is an ability to reinforce our defense or offense, by channeling reishi through our veins. Normally, only an Ect Quincy can utilize it without learning it from another Quincy firsthand. You truly are unique, Ichigo. I have no doubt that you will prove yourself to be a great addition to the ranks of our Sternritter, and you shall be given 7 days to learn the ways of the Quincy before the ceremony. Sternritter Gewel, you will be teaching him in the arts of archery and Flugbildskrit. Yhwach gave out his orders, which was answered by Giselle in an instant. Yes, Your Majesty. Hashwalt. Yhwach addressed his most loyal and trusted subordinate. Yes, Your Majesty. Seeing how Ichigo used to wield his Zanpakuto as his main weapon for quite some time, he will need some help in honing his swordsmanship due to the time he spent outside of battle. Who better to entrust the task than the best swordsman in our empire? In addition to swordsmanship, you shall be aiding his progress in the blood and his reishi manipulation, ordered Yhwach, with a predatory gleam in his eyes. His prowess in swordsmanship will be better than he ever was, when I am done with him, Your Majesty. Jugram took the order without any complaints, since he loved swordsmanship with all his being. If he could train a fellow sword wielder, he would never object to the idea. You shall be bestowed with your own Quincy cross. Take this medal of Hylage's silver, and pour your Raryoku into it. Do not worry, as your Raryoku has started to return when your dormant Quincy blood became active. It will respond to the nature of your Raryoku, and form a fitting Quincy cross for you to use. Yhwach said while holding out a medal about the size of an electric outlet, which surprised Giselle greatly. The Emperor bestowing a Quincy cross himself was the greatest honor a Sternritter could ever hope for, and there were only 3 Sternritter at the moment who held such Quincy cross, one of them being Jugram. Ichigo carefully took the medal into his hands and poured his Raryoku into it, while holding the medal in his fist. Controlling his Raryoku felt much more easier than before, when he didn't know about the Quincy side of his powers. He could place a bet that he would be able to learn Kido without any problems, not that he had anyone to teach it. The metal kept shifting its shape under Ichigo's fingers, eventually forming a cross connected to chains. When he opened his fists, Yhwach hummed in understanding, while Giselle seemed to be almost drooling. Jugram seemed to be interested in what caused his Quincy cross to take this particular shape. Ichigo fingered his first and very own Quincy cross with curiosity. It was a cross, it was vastly different from the one Uryu used. The major difference between them was the fact that Ichigo's Quincy cross was an inverted cross. The four ends were shaped like a crescent, although the tips were round instead of being sharp. There was a smaller sized cross with the same shape engraved in the center. The color of the inner cross was pitch black, while the outer cross was red. All in all, it wasn't really something traditional for the Quincy, but somehow Ichigo knew that this was right for him. I must say, you have formed quite a beautiful Quincy cross. It is quite fitting for you, since it represents you rather well, commented Yhwach, receiving a curious gaze from Ichigo. The form it takes is the result of your inner conflict between your determination and your Quincy blood, with some traces of your hollow side. Your Quincy blood considers itself unworthy to wield the holy powers due to the taint of the hollow, but your determination to be acknowledged as a true Quincy made it bend to your will. The cross being inverted shows that while it thinks of its tainted self as unworthy, it has accepted the idea of wielding the power. The inner black cross represents your Shinigami powers, but you yourself decided to forego that side of you. Alas, it is still a side of you that you were born with, so it has become dormant while balancing out the two opposite sides. The outer red cross is your hollow side showing its current supremacy over the Shinigami side, but also shows that it is under the control of your Quincy side. If you did not have the Shinigami powers within you, your hollow side would have eventually brought on your soul's death. But alas, your Shinigami side is acting as the middle ground between those two, so it will not come to that. As Ichigo listened to Yhwach's explanation, he couldn't help but to grimace at the thought of still having his inner hollow within him. He would never openly admit the fact that a small part of him actually missed his inner hollow. I thought I would be finally free of that, Ichigo muttered, when he saw a spark of red and black from his hand that held the Quincy cross. Ichigo was about to ask on how to form a bow with reishi, when something inside him urged him to focus on his Quincy cross. He saw no harm in trying, so he concentrated his Raryoku on the cross. Unsurprisingly, nothing really happened at first. Ichigo wasn't disappointed, but the same something seemed to chastise him to try it again. This time Ichigo closed his eyes, and focused on pulling the reishi around him into a solid shape instead of bringing out the Raryoku within him, purely out of instinct. He felt some of his Raryoku reaching out, enveloping the forming concentration of reishi. Holy shit, Giselle exclaimed, only to immediately cover her mouth in embarrassment of her outburst. She was surprised out of mind, that she even forgot about herself being in the presence of His Majesty for a moment. In her defense, her reaction was perfectly justified, since any other Sternritter would have reacted the same, save for a few. Ichigo opened his eyes when he heard the shocked voice of Giselle, to find his very own reishi weapon in his hand taking the form of a long bow. It had a red frame with spirals of black framing it, and had a menacing atmosphere around itself. Ichigo stared at it for a moment, unsure of the unusual feeling of holding a bow, rather than his Zanpakuto. Heilig Bogan. But, how? Even Jugram seemed to be flabbergasted at Ichigo's progress, which was something he would have never thought to be possible. A gemist Quincy using blood on his own without proper training, and now forming a Heilig Bogan on his own. It was almost like the word, impossible, meant nothing to the orange-haired Quincy. Interesting. Yhwach trailed off, intrigued at the whole situation. Ichigo was proving himself to be above any kind of expectations he held, and it was quite satisfying. If you're capable of firing a Heilig file on your own, do take a shot at myself. You need not worry about injuring me. When he heard the Emperor's request, Ichigo nodded and brought up his bow, and concentrated on forming an arrow out of reishi. Ichigo himself was eager to know what he could do, even more than Yhwach. The fact that he had any kind of spiritual powers once more was more than enough to lift his mood. This time Ichigo actually heard a voice within him, a familiar voice he hadn't heard for more than a year and a half. Pull the reishi and compress it. This isn't about pulling out your Raryoku like Kido, so your lack of control over your Raryoku due to your immense reserves won't matter at all. As much as awakening your Quincy powers helped on that department, your reserves are still too high for you to have perfect control over your Raryoku. When you're done with it, your Raryoku will code it without you even trying. Zangetsu, I will explain everything when you are asleep. For now, concentrate on the task Yhwach gave you. Your stance needs some adjustment. Open your feet and shoulders widely, with one of your feet facing your target. Also, loosen your grip on the bow. You're holding it with too much strength. Pull the string until it touches your face and align the arrow at your target. It's not like I have any experience with a bow to know the stance. Ichigo complained, which simply went ignored. Giselle was almost drooling at the sight of Ichigo's somewhat awkward but acceptable stance. He really is hot in that uniform. Ichigo felt the power pulsing through his fingers, as a solid rod of red formed in his hand, eagerly waiting to be released. Black sparks were shooting out from the rod, and red lines traced his veins, signaling that his blood artery was active. Yhwach realized that it wouldn't be wise for him to take Ichigo's Hylic file with only his blood venae active, when it was powered with blood artery but also coated with hollow Raryoku. He was still a few steps away from recovering his full strength, and the hollow Raryoku would hinder the progress he had made. Yhwach made the decision, which would have hurt his pride if it was 1,000 years ago. But now, it only gave him immeasurable pride for his son's raw potential, one that could even surpass himself. He clenched his fist, spilling his own blood on the floor of the throne room. The blood stretched out in the form of jagged lines, into the shape of a circle around him. Blood venae anhaben. When Yhwach muttered the words, the circle became a dome of blue barrier that protected him from any kind of outward attacks. The barrier had formed exactly at the same time when Ichigo released his arrow, and a streak of red struck the barrier like lightning. The hollow Raryoku was disintegrating the blood of the Quincy Emperor, but it wasn't enough to destroy a blood venae anhaben, which was immensely stronger compared to the average blood venae. As Ichigo's Hylic file dissolved into sparks of reishi, Yhwach had to grudgingly admit that it could have actually broke through his blood venae and injured him. I must admit that your Hylic file holds great advantage against your fellow Quincy, said Yhwach, causing Ichigo to scowl. He wasn't all that pleased with Yhwach's evaluation. What kind of Quincy needs advantage against his own? Ichigo only hoped that he wouldn't be rejected by the other Quincy because of it. Had you fired more than one Hylic file, I would have been forced to dodge them. But do not be disappointed in my words, Ichigo. You show great promise, and if given time to improve, you will become a powerful Quincy in your own right. Also, I give you the right to be called an Ect Quincy. Seeing how the blood technique comes naturally to you like any other Ect, you are more than worthy to be called as such. The Kurosaki will stand proud as one of our own once more. At Yhwach's declaration, Ichigo was overjoyed. While he didn't know about exactly what the difference between Ect and Gemist was, His Majesty's proud expression was more than enough to convince him that it was an honor. I am most grateful, Your Majesty. Ichigo bowed with gratitude, which brought out a grin from Yhwach. Before you retire to your new personal quarters which Hashwalt will show you, there is a matter of great importance that must be discussed. Ichigo was confused at first, but soon remembered his words earlier and nodded. I am truly curious about what you wished to tell, or ask of me, Your Majesty. Yes, before we start our discussion, I will have to ask you to refrain from any outbursts before I am done with my tale. It is heavily involved with your mother, after all. Yhwach requested, causing Ichigo's eyes widen visibly. He easily understood why His Majesty would want him to keep his temper in check. Anything about his mother was a sensitive topic to him, even after all those years. There is an old Quincy folklore, the Kaiser Jizong. The sealed Quincy king shall regain his pulse after 900 years. Another 90 years and he shall regain his intellect. After 9 more years he shall regain his strength. After 9 more days, the Quincy king shall regain the world. It isn't just a folklore, but a prophecy. It was left by my own ability, when I fell into a millennia-long slumber. A little after 1 more year, my strength will return to its fullest, but there was an unforeseen event that occurred almost 8 years ago. In the process of regaining my conscious, my ability acted on its own, and forcibly ripped off all of the impure Quincy's strength to start the process of regaining my strength. When Ichigo saw the grim expression on the Emperor's face, added with the earlier warning, he knew that he wouldn't like what he was about to hear. Earlier on, your mother was infected by a pet project of Aizen Sosuke, which should have caused her soul to kill herself. The exact method of how she sustained her life, I do not know. But she became a gemist, and pure Quincy that day. Yhwach spoke in a somber tone, saddened from the way everything had to happen. At this point Ichigo knew where this story was heading. 8 years. I had wondered about why she would have died to a hollow, one that wasn't even on the level of Ameno's. I see, Ichigo stated, desperately trying to calm himself from releasing his anger. He wouldn't show the lack of self-control now, not when the Emperor asked him to keep his calm. If he had brought this up, it meant that he wanted to clear things up with him, so he needed to hear the full story. Ever since learning that his mother was a Quincy, Ichigo couldn't understand why his mother had died to a hollow like Grand Fisher. Grand Fisher was nowhere near powerful. Its trickery may prove to be a problem, since he had lost to Grand Fisher because of it, when he hadn't even learned his Zanpakuto's name. But he doubted that it had enough power to break through his mother's blood vein. As far as he knew, Uryu didn't know how to use blood, and he was more than capable of easily destroying a hollow under the level of Ameno's. His mother was born as an Ect Quincy, so it was obvious that she could use the blood, since the technique came naturally to Ect. If she had her powers back then, the hollow would have never stood a chance. But, it was unintentional, Ichigo muttered, causing Yhwach's eyes to widen, along with Jugram and Giselle. It was unintentional. Also, if I were to blame someone, it would be the Shinigami. Ever since the Shinigami massacred the Quincy in the human world, they should have been doing their job properly, seeing how they killed off the people who could defend themselves and other humans on their own. And before I even dare to blame you, it should be placed on the very reason of her death, Aizen Sosuke. So I understand, Your Majesty. While Ichigo calmly stated, he was actually directing his anger mostly to the Shinigami for neglecting their duty. He knew that his father was powerless at the time, and the Vizards, or Urahara and Yoruichi-san, were keeping a low profile since they were technically exiles. His substitute Shinigami badge could alert him when a hollow appears nearby, so the Grand Fisher being an exception to their methods of tracking down hollows was a ridiculous thought. If the designated Shinigami had done his job properly, his mother wouldn't have died despite losing her powers. Although I am quite grateful that you have taken that well, I'm afraid the next one will be much more harder to keep your calm. At this point Ichigo really didn't want to hear what would come next. He didn't want to hear something like the Shinigami had left his mother to die, just like Yuryu's grandfather. Ichigo knew that if he heard anything like that, he wouldn't be able to stop himself from loathing the Shinigami as a whole. While I do not know of when the hollow that consumed your mother's soul was purified, said Yhwach, but Ichigo knew. It was his father that cut down Grand Fisher, who had become an Arrancar. Your mother's soul was found in one of the lower district of the northern Rukongai, the 67th district to be precise. Apparently, she was found by the 12th division. No, Ichigo knew what was coming next. He knew it too well, and he wanted it to be nothing more than a lie. She was later confirmed to be a Quincy, who lost her powers only after her soul was completely dissected. Yhwach grimaced as he eyed his son's heartbroken expression, shedding tears of grievance. Giselle knew all of this, as she had read the recently updated dating of Kurosaki Ichigo. She silently vowed once more to kill those bastards of the 12th division in the most painful manner. Jugram now understood exactly why His Majesty decided to recruit Kurosaki Ichigo. It would be more cruel to let him stay on the Shinigami's side, when they were hiding a secret on this caliber to him. He had no idea that there was more coming. The matter was revealed in a captain's meeting, sometime after Aizen's defeat with the report of her death 8 years ago. It was from a Shinigami who happened to be replacing the one who was originally stationed in Karakura town at that time, as he was needed in Soul Society due to a personal matter. The report stated that when he saw a Quincy, who were supposed to be wiped out a long time ago in his knowledge, he did not interfere. Instead of carrying out his duty, he merely observed the situation to see if he could take down both the Quincy and Hollow on his own. There was an explanation on how she seemed to be struck by an unknown attack when she was engaging the Hollow, and how she was about to be consumed by the Hollow. The Shinigami didn't interfere and let the Hollow consume her, for it would be more convenient for him to purify the Hollow when it consumed all the Quincy at the scene, which includes you. He was going to wait until the Hollow was done consuming you, but he retreated quickly when he felt the Reiatsu of another Hollow, which surpassed his own easily by tenfold. Ichigo gritted his teeth in rage. He didn't give a damn about the Shinigami now. The captains had known all of this. The Shinigami left both him and his mother to die, only because his mother was a Quincy. I think I know exactly what that other hollow was, Your Majesty. So, was there a name of this Shinigami? Ichigo all but demanded the identity of this Shinigami that left his mother to be consumed by a hollow. It was because of him that she had to be dissected at the hands of the 12th Division in her afterlife, when she should have found the peace she rightfully deserved after finally being purified by her own husband. It was the 6th seat of the 11th Division at that time, which would be the current lieutenant of the 6th Division. His name is Wandenreich, Yhwach stated, waiting for the outburst that never came. I see, Ichigo said, his voice not showing any trace of anger. To think that I actually considered him as one of my friends, when he condoned my mother's death, and condemned her to a fate worse than death. Somehow, Ichigo was actually keeping his cool, not submitting to the burning rage that was demanding to be released. Or more like compressing the rage inside him, waiting for the right time to fully release it. He didn't explode in rage nor did he lose control over his Reiatsu. His Reiatsu was actually calmer than ever. For when one was truly furious, the rage would become a freezing numbness. Ichigo thought that it was a lot more easier to keep his cool, after his Quincy blood within him awakened. That didn't mean he wasn't burning in the insides, though. Ichigo knew that he could never be able to see his friends of the Soul Society in the same light as he once did, never again. If they tried to stand in his way, he was going to put them down, hard. If his friends dared to take their side, even after they hear about what they have done to his mother, then they were no friends of his. Ichigo wondered what his father would say when he learns about the sins of his once comrades. He sincerely hoped that he would come to his senses, and take his family's side. Now I can see why they distanced themselves from me. They didn't want to risk any chances of me finding out about the whole incident. If it was revealed in the captain's meeting, would it be right for me to assume that every last one of the captains were present, Your Majesty? Ichigo asked with an icy edge evident in his voice. Giselle could easily see that Ichigo was trying hard to keep his boiling rage contained deep inside of him, and noted to herself to take him to a training ground to vent some of his anger. Yes, with the exception of the vacant seats of the 3rd, 5th and 9th Division, every captain was present during the meeting. If you wish it, I shall place an order to leave the 12th Division captain and Wandenreich untouched, as they should be rightfully yours to deal with. Yhwach suggested, which Ichigo accepted gladly. I am most grateful at your generosity, Your Majesty. Yhwach nodded and waved his hands in dismissal. Nighttime is nearing, so I'm afraid this meeting has come to an end. Hashwalt, return to your duty after you show Ichigo his quarters. You are all dismissed. Welcome to the Wandenreich, Ichigo. As they stood up to leave the throne room, Yhwach spoke once more, addressing the female Sternritter. Sternritter Gewel, I was most impressed at how you carried out the mission with such efficiency. You shall be rewarded greatly in the near future. I am honored, Your Majesty. Giselle almost squealed out with stars in her eyes. Ichigo inwardly thanked Giselle, as his fury which was barely being contained inside cooled down a little at the sight of her happiness. It was really obvious that Giselle worshipped His Majesty with all her heart, and hearing such words from him would have meant a great deal to her. I think I'll try to bury my anger inside to be released at the right time, and just feel happy for you at the moment. Ichigo wondered if Giselle knew just what kind of effect she had on him. It was actually scary to Ichigo, considering the fact that they had known each other for less than a day. It was his first actual crush, so everything he felt was something he had never experienced before, and it scared him to no end. The three Quincy left the throne room deep in thought about different matters. Giselle was in a chipper mood from receiving such praise from His Majesty, evident from the way her footsteps were almost skipping. But at the same time, she was worried about how Ichigo would react when he learned about her shrift, added with the part of her personality she hadn't shown him yet. Jugram was confused as hell with how Ichigo could use the blood on his own, when he was born as a gemist, although his status was an ek now since His Majesty gave him the right to be called one. But just how did he form a Hylic Bogan? Not even a day since Kurosaki Ichigo arrived at Silburn, and he was having a major headache because of him, even if the thought of how Ichigo would show progress as a Quincy intrigued him at the same time. Ichigo's mind was in a relatively peaceful state compared to how it was earlier that day, even with all those unpleasant revelations. He now had a purpose and a goal, even if he also developed a stupid crush on a girl he met today. He looked forward to becoming a proper Quincy like his mother, and gaining the power to take his revenge. Yes, revenge sounded nice. While each had different thoughts occupying their head, the same thought crossed their minds at some point. Their life in Silburn was going to become interesting. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like, comment and subscribe, as well as checking out the author on fanfiction.net.